One day inside the house, a woman called out to Takashi, warning him that if he did not hurry up, she would leave him behind. Before heading downstairs, Takashi quietly stopped for a moment and looked toward the medals of honor belonging to him and his comrades. After staring at them briefly, he finally answered that he was coming down. Meanwhile, Takashi's mother warmly told them to enjoy school properly after being away from it for such a long time. After that, the group finally left the house together. From Takashi's memories, everything began 3 years earlier, when war suddenly spread across the world. The fighting broke out everywhere without regard for any country or location, all because of an alien invasion. Those horrifying days continued endlessly, so terrible that words could barely describe them. Everyday life collapsed into a nightmare, while countless soldiers kept dying day after day. The only thing left was the endless extermination of aliens. Takashi quietly let out a breath as he reflected on everything. After surviving through all those events and successfully destroying every alien, he was finally scheduled to retire as of today. In a flashback, Takashi stared at the discharge papers in his hands. 3 years had already passed since the day he was drafted as a soldier, the very same time he had entered middle school. Looking back on it now, the time had passed incredibly fast. He was not deeply emotional about it, yet there was still something inside his heart that felt touched. While watching the soldiers around him celebrate, someone suddenly called out to him. His friend asked what he planned to do next. Takashi explained that he intended to return to his hometown, then casually turned the question back toward Natalie, asking about her own plans. Natalie's tone softened as she explained that her hometown had already been annihilated, leaving her with nowhere else to go. Hearing that immediately made Takashi feel that the situation sounded pitiful. Confused, Takashi wondered what exactly she was trying to imply. Natalie simply giggled before suggesting the idea of Takashi taking her back to Japan so they could live together. She admitted that she wanted to stay beside a strong man like him, but Takashi immediately denied that idea, insisting that he was definitely weaker than Natalie. Takashi quietly muttered to himself that there was really no helping it. He could never refuse Natalie whenever she asked for something, especially after she had saved him so many times before. Natalie immediately became overjoyed and agreed with him, reminding him that he should properly treat the person who had saved his life. Takashi then reminded her that the living expenses would be split equally, meaning she had to pay her share properly as well. Natalie jumped around excitedly, happily agreeing that she would pay correctly and admitting that she was already looking forward to it. Takashi then thought about returning to his hometown first and reuniting with his parents. He could only hope that they had not already assumed he was dead. Back at the place where they were staying, Natalie suddenly began thinking about something else. While Takashi packed up his belongings, he asked her what exactly a retirement request was supposed to be. Natalie explained that it was basically something similar to a resignation letter. She had heard that people were supposed to write something like that whenever they quit. Otherwise, if someone disappeared without leaving behind any notice, everybody would desperately start searching for Takashi. Hearing that made Takashi nervous, and he realized that he really should properly inform the Director General. Thinking it over, he admitted that Natalie's suggestion actually made sense, so he agreed that they should prepare a retirement request together. Natalie instantly became excited again, loudly cheering as she rushed to suggest buying letter paper right away. When they arrived at the store, both of them immediately looked confused. Natalie stared around at the stationery on display and wondered if there was anything more lovely to choose from. However, Takashi suddenly noticed something important and called Natalie over to look at the price tag. The moment he saw it, Takashi was shocked. Even a single piece of stationery was costing $300. Natalie looked at the price as well and casually thought that the store must have raised its prices again. Takashi could hardly believe it, thinking that even for the front lines, the price was way too expensive. Natalie then explained that prices had already skyrocketed to nearly 100 times higher compared to peacetime. Hearing that, Takashi suggested that ordinary origami paper would already be enough, and they should just look for something cheap instead. Natalie also started wondering whether the store even sold inexpensive paper anymore, but before they could continue searching, a woman suddenly called out to them. The woman asked if he was Vice Corporal Shibasaki, causing Takashi to look at her in confusion. The woman immediately stood tall and raised a salute before introducing herself as Daisy Reeves, a former member of the Joint Special Command 3rd Land Assault Unit. Takashi quickly remembered hearing that Daisy had only been assigned around half a year ago. Daisy nervously confirmed herself and admitted that it was an honor for her to be recognized by Vice Corporal Shibasaki. Takashi casually replied that Natalie's unit had been a complete mess back then and mentioned that Daisy had helped save them. Natalie immediately clung tightly onto Takashi's arm, refusing to let him brush things aside through confusion, while even threatening him playfully with a French kiss. Meanwhile, Daisy continued standing properly and politely requested 2 minutes of Takashi's time. Takashi repeated the words back in confusion, wondering about the meaning of those 2 minutes. Then suddenly, Daisy lunged forward and deeply bowed her head while loudly thanking him, completely catching Takashi off guard. Daisy revealed that until 1 year ago, she had worked at an orphanage in a neighboring country. She explained that their nation had enforced military conscription on every citizen because of the desperate strategic situation during the war. While continuing her story, Daisy admitted that she had guided the orphans every day while dreaming about peace someday returning. Takashi froze as he noticed the people nearby slowly starting to pay attention to them. Even while Takashi softly told her to raise her head, Daisy continued speaking. Tears started flowing from her eyes as she talked about spending time playing with children who still had a future ahead of them and discussing dreams together with those children. As she continued crying, Daisy admitted that now those children would no longer have to go to war. She also thought about how she would never again have to hear reports announcing the deaths of those children. Takashi remained stunned while listening to her story. Meanwhile, Daisy cried even louder as she repeatedly thanked him for bringing the war to an end. People inside the store slowly started turning their attention toward Daisy, and the entire atmosphere became awkward enough to make Takashi feel embarrassed. While trying to think of what he should even do in that situation, Takashi awkwardly responded that everything was really fine. After that, he quietly turned around and muttered to himself that staying there any longer would only make things even more awkward, so he urged Natalie to hurry up so they could head back home. Before leaving the store, Takashi suddenly shouted toward Daisy, telling her to be happy before quickly leaving the two girls behind. He immediately started running away, still unable to process how Daisy had suddenly burst into tears like that. Being thanked so intensely made Takashi feel strangely uncomfortable. It felt itchy to him in a way he could not explain. He simply was not used to receiving that much praise, so he honestly did not know what kind of expression he was supposed to make. While walking away, memories from the war suddenly resurfaced in his mind. He remembered one soldier saying that once his role was finished, he needed to leave that place immediately. Another soldier nearby had also shouted at him, insisting that he should stop pretending to be one of them because he was no longer human anymore. Takashi headed straight home afterward. He no longer wanted to deal with any strange commotions, so he planned to quickly deliver the retirement request and finish everything as soon as possible. Suddenly, Natalie arrived while carrying a sheet of paper. She excitedly showed it to Takashi, proudly presenting how lovely it looked. Takashi could hardly believe that she had somehow managed to get such cute letter paper. Natalie then explained that Daisy had given it to them as a thank you gift. Apparently, Daisy had originally been saving that stationery to send letters to the children back in her hometown. However, Daisy had thanked them and admitted that she no longer needed it anymore. She had also wished for both Natalie and Takashi to live happily. Natalie immediately clung onto Takashi again while happily saying that the two of them should definitely be happy together. Takashi quietly agreed while continuing to stare at the paper in his hands. As they looked at it, Natalie commented that for someone who belonged to their unit, Daisy surprisingly was not very jaded. She described Daisy as straightforward, or rather simply honest. Takashi quietly guessed that the war had ended before Daisy became tainted by all the stupid behavior and antics inside their unit. After finishing the retirement request, Takashi finally headed toward his workplace. The moment he arrived, he happily handed the letter over to the Director General, although the director immediately looked confused after receiving it. She asked what exactly it was, and Takashi casually explained that it was their retirement request. The letter thoroughly expressed their desire to return to Japan as strongly as possible. The Director General stared silently at the paper for a moment before immediately rejecting it. Takashi instantly shouted in shock, unable to understand why. However, the Director General calmly explained that the strange and disgusting voice Takashi had just used counted as sexual harassment and was worthy of a court-martial. Takashi quickly defended himself by insisting that he was still a sensitive teenager. The Director General immediately questioned what he even meant by sensitive, arguing that if Takashi counted as sensitive, then everybody else in the world would have to become ultra-sensitive too, all while mumbling insults under her breath. Takashi also quietly muttered insults back at her under his breath, calling her unlucky tick eyebrows, but despite that, he remained fully determined to go back to Japan. He continued trying to push forward with the retirement procedures while Natalie happily added that the two of them would now live together from this point onward. The Director General suddenly stared at both of them with teary eyes before unexpectedly starting to cry, making both Takashi and Natalie feel uneasy. She immediately started yelling at Takashi, questioning why he was suddenly talking about retirement without considering the feelings of the Director General even a little. She pointed fingers at him while demanding to know what was wrong with him all of a sudden. She continued ranting that they were already overwhelmed with work since the war had only just ended, loudly begging him to at least help her out a little longer. The Director General then added that Takashi probably did not even realize yet that he would still need to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Takashi repeated the words non-disclosure agreement in confusion. The Director General then explained that it was basically a contract stating that they were forbidden from talking about anything they had seen or heard during the war. Takashi quietly listened to her explanation. The Director General admitted that the war truly involved countless things that should never be spoken about openly. Even she herself had thrown her morals away just to survive through everything. Because of that, she understood the desire to hide those memories, and honestly, she did not want to talk about them either. She continued explaining that despite all of that, everyone still simply returned home on their own once everything ended. The Director General then revealed that she had been getting heavily scolded by the higher-ranking military officials lately. According to them, if classified information were to leak out, somebody would need to take responsibility for it. After listening to her long explanation, Takashi simply responded that he honestly felt bad for her situation. However, he still questioned what any of that had to do with their retirement request, since they were already planning to handle all the paperwork properly anyway. Even though he carried the rank of vice corporal, Takashi pointed out that he was still nothing more than a 16-year-old brat. There was no way someone like him could possibly have any real authority or responsibilities. The Director General immediately stared at him and questioned why he was making such an exhausted expression. She looked at him pitifully while asking whether he truly did not feel sorry for the Director General constantly getting scolded like this. Takashi quickly responded that he had literally just said he felt sorry for her. However, he also questioned whether handling that responsibility was not already part of the Director General's actual job in the first place. The moment he said that, the Director General exploded in anger once again. She immediately declared that if Takashi was only going to act mean toward her, then his retirement request was officially rejected. She loudly announced directly toward him that from now on, Takashi would become the Director General's exclusive partner, meaning retirement was absolutely forbidden. Takashi's eyes widened in shock as he loudly demanded to know what she was even talking about while telling her to stop messing around with him. Meanwhile, the Director General started questioning herself emotionally. She wondered why she should willingly let go of such an excellent soldier after everything. For the sake of her own mental stability as Director General, she desperately begged Takashi to stay by her side. She then started clinging onto him while trying to convince him by promising to shower him with affection. Takashi immediately rejected the idea. He insisted that if the Director General truly wanted someone excellent, then she should simply go to Natalie instead of him. Right after saying that, he quickly turned toward Natalie and loudly tried to get her agreement. However, Natalie immediately clung tightly onto Takashi as well. She firmly declared that she belonged together with Takashi completely in both body and soul, meaning the two of them would never be separated. Afterward, Natalie mockingly told the Director General to rot miserably by herself while insulting her as a stupid eggplant. The Director General's expression immediately became even more frustrated after hearing that. She stubbornly declared that both Takashi and Natalie absolutely had to stay. Even if she had to use every bit of authority available to the Director General, she fully refused to allow either of them to retire. Meanwhile, Natalie only continued teasing the Director General after noticing tears starting to form in her eyes, casually joking that it served her right. Takashi stopped Natalie, telling her that he understood how she felt, but she really should not keep provoking the Director General any further. Meanwhile, the Director General continued sobbing loudly, and Takashi finally shouted for Natalie to just go home already. After they returned, Takashi immediately started packing up his belongings. While doing so, he could not stop himself from cursing under his breath. There was no way he could accept only being allowed to go home as a reserve soldier. Even now, he still was not convinced by any of it at all. Takashi honestly no longer wanted anything to do with the military, even though the war itself had already ended. As he continued packing his things, he could only let out frustrated sighs. Natalie tried cheering him up, telling him not to look so depressed and suggesting that things were probably fine anyway. Apparently, even reserve soldiers still continued receiving payments, meaning they could still live comfortably. However, Takashi immediately cut her off in frustration and called her an idiot. He explained that if they accepted the money, then eventually they would be forced to return again someday, and he absolutely did not want to stay involved with the military anymore. Natalie then started thinking about something and casually commented that Takashi really was an overly serious person. Takashi looked directly at her with a serious expression. To him, the real issue was not whether they could simply run away from things or not. Inside his mind, he quietly wondered why he had to start living a life on the run together with Natalie now that the world had finally become peaceful again. He zipped up his bag, then turned toward Natalie while carrying his luggage. At that moment, Takashi firmly admitted to himself that all he truly wanted now was to live a completely normal high school life again. They were finally returning to Japan. Natalie proudly smiled back at him. After finishing their preparations, the two of them walked through the whole way together. They boarded their flight and sat beside each other during the trip before finally arriving at the international airport. After the long flight, they transferred onto the subway, both quietly enjoying each other's company throughout the ride. Many hours later, they finally arrived at Takashi's hometown. Takashi quietly observed the scenery around him while Natalie happily admired the town, realizing that this was the hometown Takashi had always talked about. Meanwhile, Takashi's eyes remained fixed on the familiar surroundings. Inside his mind, he quietly reflected on how the town had not changed at all, exactly the same as it had been 3 years ago. He really had managed to return home alive. While Takashi continued spacing out emotionally, Natalie suddenly commented that the town looked like the perfect place to build their love nest together. Her teasing immediately pulled Takashi out of his sentimental thoughts and made him look toward her. Natalie laughed while calling him an idiot playfully. In response, Takashi grabbed her face and firmly reminded her that they were about to arrive at his parents' house very soon, so she needed to be careful. He seriously warned Natalie not to say anything unnecessary. Natalie casually responded that she already understood and insisted that she would not ruin the emotional reunion. According to her, she only planned to introduce herself and announce their marriage, almost as if she believed that should reassure him. However, Takashi immediately cut her off again, insisting that was exactly the kind of unnecessary thing he was warning her about. Natalie tried speaking again, but Takashi immediately told her to stay quiet. As they continued walking, Natalie clung tightly onto his arm. At that moment, Takashi quietly felt relieved that he had finally returned to the peaceful everyday life he had wished for ever since 3 years ago. He softly smiled while looking at Natalie. Then memories from the war flashed through his mind once again. To protect these peaceful days, he had fought while constantly risking his own life. The ordinary peace he had desperately wished for was finally right in front of him now. Takashi then remembered standing before the people who had once beaten him down. However, compared to those peaceful days that had remained unchanged, the one who had truly changed was himself. A woman was trapped inside a dream, desperately calling out to her brother while guards escorted him away. She kept begging him not to leave, but her brother only looked back at her calmly, reassuring her that he would be fine before continuing on his way. Tears streamed down her face as she desperately questioned why Takun had to go to war in the first place. Suddenly, she woke up while shouting his name. Still crying, she looked toward their photograph. It had already been 3 years since her brother was sent to the battlefield. Back when Takashi had been drafted because of his aptitude, she could hardly believe it. To her, Takashi had always just been an ordinary boy with average grades. The woman eventually stepped outside and once again checked for military notices regarding casualties. If her brother had died in battle, their family would have already been informed. Every single day had become a routine of checking for news of his death. After finding nothing again today, she quietly thanked God for the fact that Takun was still alive. While she was standing there checking, someone suddenly called out to her. The moment she turned around, she saw Takashi standing there before her. Takashi casually greeted her after such a long time apart, admitting that he had somehow managed to make it back alive. Her eyes widened in complete shock while Takashi awkwardly asked if his older sister was alright. Still unable to process everything, she suddenly hugged Takashi tightly while repeatedly calling out Takun's name. Completely overwhelmed with emotion, she kissed and licked his cheek before even biting his ear in excitement. Takashi immediately complained that it hurt, but eventually gave up resisting her. His older sister openly declared how much she loved him, while Takashi bluntly responded by pointing out how exhausted and haggard she looked. He then asked whether she had even been eating properly lately because her face looked pale. She quietly answered yes. Takashi then suggested that they should go eat beef bowls for now since his older sister looked starving too. However, Natalie immediately objected to the idea of a beautiful woman like herself being taken to a beef bowl restaurant. Takashi disagreed right away. According to him, if it were an actual date, then he would obviously choose a proper restaurant. However, if he was eating together with his wife, then a beef bowl restaurant was absolutely the right choice instead. He simply wanted his close wife to experience his favorite food. Natalie instantly blushed after hearing that. Meanwhile, Takashi's older sister became completely confused after hearing the word wife and immediately questioned who Natalie even was. Takashi casually introduced Natalie to his older sister. Natalie proudly introduced herself as Natalie Taefeitbingster and openly declared that she and Takashi were already married with the intention of having babies together. The moment she heard that, Takashi's older sister froze in shock. Takashi immediately told her to calm down and explained that Natalie was simply an idiot who had fought beside him during the war. Since Natalie no longer had anywhere else to go, she had decided to follow him home instead. Takashi added that he would personally look after his older sister, so she could basically just ignore Natalie completely. However, Natalie quickly complained that Takashi should not tell his older sister to ignore her because she genuinely wanted to get along with her future sister-in-law. Takashi's older sister immediately shouted back in shock that she absolutely refused to allow Natalie to marry Takun. Natalie dramatically declared that an obstacle had already appeared between the married couple. Meanwhile, Takashi jokingly commented that the higher the wall standing before love, the stronger that love burns. He even begged his older sister to become an even taller wall for them. Hearing that completely stunned his older sister, because Takuin had never been the type of person to make jokes like that before. Takashi eventually decided that they should stop talking there for now and just go eat first, promising that he would explain the details properly once they arrived. The three of them headed to the restaurant and started eating together. While watching both Takashi and Natalie eat, Nasen questioned whether they were really going to be alright consuming that much food. However, Takashi immediately turned the concern back toward her instead. To him, the real issue was whether that amount was even enough for Nasen. Since it had already been so long since he last properly ate rice, even this amount still felt slightly too little for him. Nasen quickly shook off the topic and got straight to the point instead. She directly asked Takashi what kind of relationship he actually had with Natalie. Takashi casually answered that the two of them were simply best friends for life. Meanwhile, Natalie proudly declared that they were seriously the strongest married couple possible. Nasan immediately demanded a serious answer and directly asked whether the two of them were dating. Both Takashi and Natalie froze for a moment before suddenly laughing together. To Takashi, hearing the word dating again felt strangely nostalgic. Natalie also laughed at the word itself. Afterward, Takashi slowly began explaining things properly. Back on the battlefield, there had constantly been countless dead soldiers around them. Entire squads that charged into battle were often wiped out completely. Even the few who somehow survived miraculously would frequently die during another suicide assault the very next day. Every single day felt like standing side by side with death itself. Even when some soldiers tried escaping reality by relying on weed or drugs, they often ended up dying anyway because they could no longer move properly during combat. Watching that happen only drove even more people insane. Because of that, soldiers eventually started openly speaking about whatever hopes for living still remained inside their hearts. Some dreamed about getting married. Others wanted children. Many simply wanted to survive long enough to see their families again. As long as they survived today, then tomorrow would still exist for them. Those small dreams were what motivated everyone to keep moving forward. That was why hearing the simple word dating now felt nostalgic to Takashi. Nasen could only sit there in complete shock while listening to his explanation. Meanwhile, Natalie casually pointed out that Takashi's older sister looked completely creeped out now. The moment she heard all of that, Nain suddenly started crying. She admitted that she never realized things had been that cruel for Takashi and the others. Takashi immediately felt guilty after seeing her reaction. He quietly thought that he probably should not have talked about those things at all. Trying to change the atmosphere, he gently called out to Nasen and reminded her that she would never regain her energy if she did not eat properly. Since he had safely managed to return home alive like this, he wanted all of them to eat a lot today. Meanwhile, Natalie happily decided that she was going to order drinks and curry for herself. She then asked what the other two wanted. Takashi immediately answered that he wanted katsu curry. Nasen, however, quietly replied that water alone would be enough for her. Nasen quietly wiped away her tears while repeating the words safe and sound to herself, even though he had clearly gone through horrifying experiences during the war. At that moment, Nasen slowly realized something. The beloved Takuin she had finally reunited with after 3 long years felt slightly different from the brother she used to know. After finishing their meal, all of them headed back home together. The moment Takashi's parents saw him, they froze in complete surprise. Takashi calmly greeted both of them, announcing that he was finally home. His mother immediately rushed toward him and hugged him tightly while crying. Meanwhile, Takashi casually mentioned that he had somehow managed to come back alive after everything, almost as if he still found it unbelievable himself. His mother continued welcoming him home through tears. While hugging her, Takashi quietly observed his mother closely. He suddenly realized that her body had become much thinner and smaller than before. Even their heights had completely reversed now. There was also noticeably more white hair on her head. Just from not seeing each other for only 3 years, his once energetic and youthful mother had changed that much already. The realization alone was enough to make Takashi tear up as well, and he tightly hugged his mother back. Soon after, his father also started crying before hugging both Takashi and his wife together. He repeatedly expressed how thankful he was that Takashi had safely returned alive. Takashi quietly apologized for making them worry all this time, but his father immediately answered that as long as Takashi was safe, nothing else truly mattered. After their emotional reunion settled down slightly, Natalie suddenly called out to Takashi. She quietly whispered for him to hurry up and properly introduce the cute Natalie-chan to the rest of the family. Takashi glanced at her before finally introducing Natalie to his family. Natalie introduced herself as Takashi's comrade-in-arms, Natalie Tafike Bingster. She explained that her hometown had been completely destroyed and that every single one of her relatives had already died, leaving her with nobody else to rely on except Takashi now. Natalie also sincerely promised that she would not cause any trouble and politely asked them to allow her to become part of their family. Takashi's mother looked completely confused and asked whether Natalie was simply Takashi's friend. However, Takashi immediately corrected that idea and explained that Natalie was far more than just a friend. She was literally his comrade in arms from the battlefield. Takashi continued explaining that Natalie was so outstanding that there was practically nobody in the military who did not know her. She had even saved his life multiple times throughout the war. Because of Natalie, he had been able to safely return home and reunite with them like this. The moment they heard that, both of Takashi's parents were left completely shocked. Without hesitation, Takashi's mother tightly hugged Natalie while repeatedly thanking her through tears. Natalie looked confused by the sudden affection and quietly asked what was wrong. However, Takashi's mother continued crying while thanking Natalie over and over again for saving her son's life. Natalie honestly did not know how to respond anymore. Meanwhile, Takashi's mother tearfully insisted that Natalie could stay with their family forever if she wanted. She repeatedly told Natalie that their home would always welcome her. Even while still crying nonstop, Takashi's mother tightly held Natalie's hands and continued thanking her again and again. Watching the scene before him, Takashi quietly smiled. Natalie also smiled warmly back at Takashi's mother. At that moment, everyone there was genuinely happy. Later that night inside the bedroom, Natalie admitted that Takashi truly had wonderful parents. She honestly never expected them to accept her so quickly like that. Meanwhile, Takashi quietly admitted to himself that he had actually been hoping his parents would refuse to hand their son over to her. Natalie casually remarked that it was too bad her wonderful inner personality had not come out during the meeting. Takashi immediately thought that the only reason his parents accepted her so easily was precisely because that inner side of Natalie never appeared, leaving Natalie completely speechless. Afterward, Natalie climbed out of bed and shifted the topic to something more serious. She questioned whether Takashi truly did not need to tell his family about it. Takashi looked toward her and asked what exactly she meant. Natalie clarified that she was referring to his body. Takashi quietly turned toward Natalie. Originally, he had fully intended to tell his family the truth as well. However, after seeing the worried expressions on their faces earlier, he simply could not bring himself to say it anymore. Natalie gently pointed out that his mother had looked unbelievably happy after finally reuniting with him. However, Takashi explained that nobody could casually reveal to their crying mother that her son's body had already been modified. To him, telling them the truth would not make anybody happy anyway. Because of that, he believed it was obviously better to keep silent about it instead. Takashi then firmly admitted that he intended to keep it hidden for the rest of his life. Since the modifications did not interfere with his daily life anyway, he saw no reason to reveal it. Natalie simply warned him not to get caught, especially since he could be pretty clumsy at times. Soon after, Takashi excitedly changed the topic again and announced that their transfer destination had already been decided. They would be attending the exact same high school as Nei-san. Just the thought of wearing a school uniform alone already made Takashi feel that his youth points were skyrocketing. Throughout the war, he had constantly dreamed about finally living an ordinary high school life like that someday. Natalie immediately disagreed, admitting that she had already had enough of group living. However, Takashi quickly argued that military life and high school life should not be grouped together at all. Filled with excitement, he suddenly jumped onto Natalie while passionately declaring that he would absolutely make her high school life fun no matter what. He repeatedly promised her while practically begging. Natalie questioned whether he truly meant that and asked if he would properly take responsibility if things ended up not being fun at all. Takashi happily declared that by the time graduation came, he would make sure she cried because of how ridiculously enjoyable her high school life had been. Right at that moment, Nei-sen suddenly walked into the room. She asked whether Takuin was seriously planning to attend her high school. Takashi casually confirmed it, although he admitted that he still needed to pass the transfer exams first. The moment Natalie heard the word exams, she immediately reacted with disgust. Elsewhere, inside a dark room, a phone continued buzzing non-stop from an endless stream of missed calls. The name displayed on the screen was Owagami Tenga. At the other end of the calls, Owagami gritted his teeth in frustration before finally throwing the phone away in anger while shouting furiously about why she refused to answer any of his calls. Consumed by irritation, Owagami declared that she was underestimating him and swore that he would definitely make Shibusaki Karen become his woman someday. Natalie kept reading her textbook while complaining that studying for the exam was such a pain. She suggested that they should just ask the military to pull some strings so they could transfer schools easily. However, Takashi argued that involving the military would immediately expose them as returnees from the battlefield, and they would only stand out in a bad way. He wanted to live a normal high school life, and Natalie's idea did not sound like something a triumphant warrior would do. He reminded her that she could easily pass if she used her trait. Natalie simply agreed, but then Karen suddenly questioned whether the two of them were actually being serious. Both of them turned toward her as Karen pointed out that they were trying to cover 3 whole years of middle school studies just by browsing books at the store. Natalie confidently believed it was a piece of cake, while Takashi explained that they did not have the time to attend cram school anyway. Karen could only stare at them before bursting out, explaining that her high school did not have such a low deviation value that anyone could pass just by casually browsing books. In fact, the school ranked on the higher end within the prefecture. She had finally started hoping that she might be able to attend school together with Takuin, only for that hope to turn into nothing. Takashi simply told her that he was concentrating and ordered her to stay quiet. Both he and Natalie were focusing seriously. Karen quietly observed them and thought about how, for the past 5 days, the two of them had repeatedly browsed books from opening time until closing time. Even today, they had already been doing it for over 6 hours straight. Their concentration honestly amazed her, though she felt it was not exactly something worthy of praise. Suddenly, Natalie happily closed her book and announced that she had already finished reviewing 3 years' worth of every subject. She immediately grabbed Karen, saying they were done studying and wanted to look around the store instead. Karen questioned whether she was truly fine with the studying, but Natalie confidently reassured her that there was no problem and everything had been perfectly completed. Karen worried properly about her despite the fact that she was basically freeloading there, and that was exactly why Natalie loved her so much. Meanwhile, Karen quietly felt guilty inside. Even though she had tagged along while trying to get in the way of their relationship, hearing Natalie say something like that only made her feel worse. Takuin and Natalie were unbelievably close. They were always together, and somehow it had even become normal for them to sleep in the same room. No matter how anyone looked at it, the distance between them felt completely strange for a boy and girl their age. Karen could not help describing Natalie in her mind. Her perfectly doll-like face, her friendly personality, and the way she smiled all resembled an angel so much that even another girl's heart could skip a beat. Yet Takuin acted completely unaffected by it, making Karen wonder what kind of relationship the two of them truly had. Then suddenly, Karen noticed something that immediately frightened her. Natalie asked what was wrong, and standing right behind her was a massive, tall man. It was Owagami Tenga. The moment he called out Shibasaki's name, Karen became visibly scared. He shouted right near her face, calling her a bastard while demanding to know why she had ignored his calls and whether she was mocking him. Natalie immediately grabbed Karen's shoulder and warned Owagami not to touch her. Owagami instantly became furious, raging at her while threatening to destroy her after dealing with Shibasaki. However, Natalie calmly asked whether he wanted to die, and that only made him even angrier as he mocked her nerve for standing there with such a smug expression. Owagami then decided that he would violate Natalie so badly, but the moment those words left his mouth, Natalie's expression completely changed. In a cold voice, she quietly declared that she would kill him. Karen watched in shock, unable to believe that this was really Natalie because she suddenly looked like an entirely different person. At that moment, Takashi arrived behind them and immediately questioned why Natalie was releasing bloodlust, warning her not to cause trouble for ordinary people. Natalie quickly defended herself, insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that Owagami was clearly the bad one. She angrily called him an arrogant meatbag and suggested that they crush him because he seemed to be stalking Karen. Takashi became confused and turned toward Karen, asking whether Owagami was her boyfriend. Karen immediately denied it and firmly explained that she was solely devoted to Takuin. Takashi apologized right away, admitting that he had completely assumed Owagami was Karen's boyfriend and that Natalie had messed with him and made him angry because of her short temper. Even that single comment clearly showed the kind of impression Takashi had of Natalie. Then Owagami spoke up and asked Takashi whether he was Shibasaki's younger brother. He mentioned hearing that Takashi had gone off to war or something similar. Takashi was visibly surprised, admitting that it was true while also questioning how Owagami knew so much about him. Owagami only grinned before walking away. After he left, Takashi questioned who that guy even was and wondered why he was wearing such a ridiculously tight shirt. Natalie casually remarked that Owagami was probably just an idiot who did not even know his own clothing size. Karen immediately told both of them to stop talking like that and explained that there was not a single student in her high school who did not know Owagami Tenga. She explained that Owagami Tenga was an anomaly who enjoyed watching people suffer more than anything else. He was extremely strong in fights and had even half-killed professional fighters before. Every single day, he caused trouble without consequence. His parents were famous dignitaries with influence and power, which meant nobody could stop him. Many students had already refused to come to school because of him, and Karen admitted that she could not even bring herself to explain everything he had done. To think that she herself had become one of his targets. Karen remembered Owagami pinning her against the wall while forcing her to become his woman and threatening the people around her. Her classmates had desperately tried to protect her even while risking their own safety, but that only cornered her even more. Her classmates kept getting hurt because of her, and the guilt became so painful that she eventually could no longer bring herself to attend school. More than anything, Karen did not want Takuin and the others getting involved. Especially after Takasi had finally managed to return alive, she could not bear the thought of dragging him into something painful all over again. Karen remained deep in thought while Natalie suddenly remarked that Owagami was far too dangerous and that she knew she should have dealt with him earlier. Takasi was about to say something, but Natalie continued complaining about how annoying Owagami was. Then Karen received a message from him. The message warned that if she did not want her little brother to get killed, she needed to come to Owagami's house. Back at home, Takasi repeatedly called out to Karen during dinner, and she only responded on the third attempt. She quietly asked why Takuin was calling her, and he pointed out that the food was spilling. However, Karen's mind remained trapped on Owagami's message. She began thinking that maybe she should simply prepare herself and accept his invitation. She questioned whether that was the only choice left for her. If she kept running forever, then the things precious to her would eventually be destroyed. In the end, she convinced herself that everything would be fine as long as she endured it. That had to be the best solution. Takasi moved closer and questioned what was wrong with her because she kept spacing out. Panicking, Karen stumbled over her words and awkwardly asked what he meant. Takasi pointed out that she was panicking way too much. Ever since they returned home, she had been acting strange. He directly asked whether something had happened. Stuttering nervously, Karen insisted that nothing was wrong before quickly thanking them for the meal and trying to leave the table. However, Takasi suddenly grabbed her arm and bluntly pointed out how terrible she was at covering things up. Karen froze in place and nervously asked what he was talking about. Takasi casually replied that it was the same as always before asking whether she had been worrying about the guy from earlier that afternoon. Natalie immediately joined in, pointing out that Karen had obviously been acting strange ever since they met that guy. Karen quickly denied it again, but Natalie reminded them that Karen herself had said Owagami was stalking her. Takasi then provocatively asked whether Owagami really was a stalker. Karen denied it once more and insisted that there was nothing for them to worry about. However, Takasi immediately pointed out that she had completely stopped talking ever since they got back from the department store. He questioned what exactly she had been thinking about while making such a tearful expression. Karen could no longer respond. She never realized that Takuin had been watching her so closely the entire time, and now she no longer knew what to do with the two conflicting emotions inside her. Part of her desperately wanted Takasi to help her, yet at the same time she did not want him involved at all. She wanted him to save her, but she also wanted to protect him from getting dragged into this situation. She understood that if she cried right there, it would immediately reveal how deeply worried she truly was. Takasi quietly stared at her before telling Karen that it was better to confide her worries to the people around her. If she kept everything bottled up inside, her perspective would only narrow, and eventually she would no longer be able to deal with it properly. He gently encouraged her to at least try telling them because they were family after all. The moment those words reached her, Karen finally burst into tears. Afterward, Natalie and Takasi carefully read through all the messages on Karen's phone. Takasi could hardly believe what kind of person Owagami was, while Natalie completely agreed. Takasi questioned how someone like Owagami could even grow up into such a complete scumbag. Meanwhile, Natalie coldly remarked that men like Owagami should be sent straight to the battlefield so they could die there immediately. Takasi glanced toward Natalie and quietly realized that things were becoming dangerous. The bad habit Natalie had not shown for a long time was beginning to surface again. If Natalie and Owagami ever came into contact once more, the situation could easily turn into something far worse. Karen continued crying while apologizing to both of them for dragging them into her problems. More than anything, she could not stop thinking about the possibility of Takuin getting hurt because of her. Meanwhile, Takasi calmly held onto her phone and immediately blocked Owagami's calls and messages, declaring that the matter was finished. He even sent Owagami a message saying that the police would be called and that he should tremble in fear while sleeping. Karen stared at him in complete shock while Natalie burst into laughter, clearly impressed by Takasi's response. Karen quickly grabbed her phone back and worried that what he did was dangerous, but Takasi casually reassured her that everything was fine and called her too much of a worrywart. He calmly told her to leave everything to him because he and Natalie were together anyway. However, Karen still could not process the situation at all. She could only think about Takuin and Natalie being placed in danger because of her. Takasi quietly noticed once again that Karen always worried more about other people than herself. He reassured her that things would somehow work out, but Karen immediately insisted that they would not. Later, the three of them went out together. While walking, Karen nervously called out to Takuin and suggested that they should just head home already. However, Takasi pointed out that even though the transfer exam was approaching, they could not simply lock themselves inside the house forever. They still needed to look for another bookstore where they could browse and study. Karen anxiously questioned what they would do if Owagami found them again. Takasi calmly reminded her that she was together with him, so everything would be fine. In fact, he admitted that he was far more worried about Owagami showing up while Karen and Natalie were alone house-sitting together. Hearing that, Karen quietly agreed. Takasi already knew that Natalie would absolutely show no mercy if something like that happened. The last thing he wanted was to come home and find a crowd of police officers gathered outside the house. For Agami's sake as well, Takasi believed it was safer for the three of them to stay together as a group. As they continued walking, Natalie quietly informed him that they were being followed. Takasi already knew. Judging by the way the men walked and the shifts in their center of gravity, he could tell they were carrying something similar to tool knives. Natalie irritably commented that they were seriously annoying and casually asked whether she could deal with them herself. However, Takasi immediately refused because if Natalie handled it, she would definitely overdo things. Takasi then started walking down a different path, causing Karen to quickly ask where he was going. He calmly explained that he thought it would be better to settle her worries first. Confused, Karen asked what he meant, but Takasi only reassured her once again that everything would be fine. Meanwhile, the men following them suddenly stopped and started calling someone on the phone. Then, while Takasi, Natalie, and Karen continued walking together, a car suddenly sped past them from extremely close range, making all three of them freeze in place. Takasi, Natalie, and Karen suddenly found themselves surrounded by a group of men. One of them was holding a pole while declaring that there was no escape for them anymore. Karen immediately panicked, unable to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, Takasi quietly thought that getting used to situations like this was honestly frightening in its own way, but Karen's innocent reaction somehow felt refreshing to him. Then a man stepped out of the car while furiously shouting Shibasaki's name. Karen ignored him completely, and on top of that, she even tried calling the police, which only made him even angrier as he accused her of mocking him and insulted her repeatedly. The tight shirt, the crude threats, and the complete lack of vocabulary made it obvious to Takasi that the man was definitely Owagami. Takasi calmly pointed out that there was no point in hiding his face anymore. Owagami immediately exploded in anger, shouting at Takasi not to underestimate him. Natalie was already about to attack Owagami right then and there, but Takasi quickly stopped her and warned her not to turn it into a real battle. If Natalie completely lost control, that would only end up being a mountain of corpses afterward. Owagami screamed that he would destroy everything. He threatened to break Karen while forcing her brother to watch before killing them both, and then he ordered Karen to get into the car. Takasi calmly told Karen to settle down because somebody would eventually call the police anyway. However, Karen tearfully insisted that it was fine even if the police were called. Takasi quietly realized that all he had done was send Owagami a slightly provocative email, yet things had escalated into this situation already. At the same time, he did not believe that simply calling the police would fundamentally solve anything. In the end, he decided it would be better to settle the matter properly right there. Takasi then questioned why Owagami was targeting Karen in the first place. Even if someone wanted to express their feelings, there was obviously a proper way to do it. Before Owagami could answer, Owagami's men immediately shouted at Takasi, warning him to watch the way he spoke around Owagami. In response, Takasi raised his voice back at them, pointing out that if they all kept making so much noise, Owagami would not even be able to speak properly. He then sarcastically told them that they should apologize to Owagami instead. Owagami furiously glared at Takasi, convinced that he was being looked down on. However, Takasi remained completely unbothered and casually remarked that he simply did not want to underestimate someone who looked like they smelled bad. That single comment immediately pushed Owagami into another fit of rage as he swore that he would never forgive Takasi. At that moment, Natalie quietly called out to Takasi and reminded him about the promise he made to her. He had promised to make her high school life enjoyable and give her memories that would even make her cry during graduation. She then looked toward Owagami and questioned whether Takasi could really fulfill that promise if garbage like him attended the same school. Natalie plainly admitted that she had no desire to attend a school where Owagami existed. Natalie then directly confronted Owagami, calling him complete trash. She questioned whether he felt no shame attacking a woman purely for his own selfish desires. She bluntly told him that Karen was not his mother and mocked him for acting like a mama's boy obsessed with forcing his selfishness onto others. Owagami immediately tried to punch Natalie, making Karen panic, but before the fist could land, Takasi caught it effortlessly. Takasi agreed that Natalie was right. If someone like Owagami remained around them, then there was no way they would ever get to enjoy the normal school life they had dreamed about. Takasi tightened his grip around Owagami's fist and coldly reminded him that this entire situation was something Owagami himself had started. The pressure alone caused Owagami's fist to start bleeding. Then, in the next instant, Takasi slammed him down onto the road and punched him directly into the ground hard enough to crack and shatter the pavement beneath him. Owagami's followers completely froze in shock. Even Karen could not properly process the scene unfolding in front of her. Meanwhile, Owagami himself had already been knocked unconscious. Takasi effortlessly lifted Owagami up and casually asked the terrified group around them whether they could guide him to Owagami's house. Even while speaking, he complained that being ignored would make him lonely, but Owagami's men were far too frightened to answer him properly. Takasi then asked Natalie whether he might have overdone things a little because now nobody could even hold a conversation anymore. Natalie casually replied that it was his fault for being too clumsy with his strength. She also pointed out that the loud impact from earlier could attract unwanted attention, so it would be better for them to move quickly. Besides, since Owagami was still only a high school student, Takasi intended to make Owagami's parents properly take responsibility for everything. Takasi then told Natalie to spend some time hanging out with Karen while he handled things himself and promised that he would return by tomorrow morning. Natalie happily agreed without hesitation, while Karen still remained frozen in shock over everything that had happened. Karen could not stop thinking about how Takasi had shattered the road with nothing but his bare hands. Yet despite something so absurd happening right in front of her, both Takasi and Natalie continued speaking to each other with their usual relaxed and casual tone. At that moment, Karen truly realized for the first time just how abnormal the two of them really were. Takasi then called out to Owagami's followers once more and bluntly warned them that if they did not want to end up like Owagami, they had better cooperate immediately. Terrified, the men instantly rushed toward the van and obediently prepared to move. Meanwhile, Natalie casually invited Karen to go eat sweets together, but Karen's thoughts remained trapped on what Takuin must have experienced on the battlefield to become the way he was now. The next day, Owagami's entire family was kneeling on the ground before Karen while desperately apologizing. They begged for forgiveness and insisted that they would do absolutely anything if only their lives could be spared. Hearing that, Natalie casually pointed out that they claimed they would do anything and even suggested cutting off their fingers. Karen immediately responded that they should simply forgive them already. However, Takasi calmly stated that if they were going to settle things, then they should settle them properly. He then handed Karen several cards and documents. Owagami's family explained that Takasi could withdraw as much money as he wanted, but Karen hesitated and did not want to accept the passbooks. Karen was shocked to see that they had even brought commuter passes and insurance documents with them. It honestly looked as though they had gathered every single valuable thing they could think of. Takasi then looked directly at Owagami's father and pointed out that Karen was already saying that much for their sake. However, he coldly warned the man not to misunderstand the situation. There was no way they could simply return home pretending everything was resolved after what Owagami had done. Leaning closer, Takasi quietly reminded him that there was no way a proper penalty could be avoided after his son had ruined the lives of so many people. Takasi seriously ordered Owagami's father to distribute all the money there to every victim his son had harmed. On top of that, he demanded that their entire family move away immediately and never return again. Owagami's father trembled in fear as he quickly agreed to every condition without resistance. As they were leaving, Karen quietly glanced back toward Owagami. The traces of the terrifying tyrant everyone feared were completely gone now. The invisible rule that had controlled the entire town for so long seems to have been completely overturned by Takuin's actions. Meanwhile, Takasi casually declared that the boring errands were finally finished, so now he could go back to focusing on studying for the transfer exam. 1 week after the Owagami incident, Takasi and Natalie were sitting inside the classroom answering their transfer test. After finishing, Takasi calmly commented that the exam had actually been pretty easy. He felt confident that he had answered around 90% of the questions correctly, so things should turn out fine. Natalie agreed immediately, casually describing the exam as a complete piece of cake. The two of them quietly stared around the school afterward, and Natalie happily remarked that starting next month, this would become the school they commuted to every day. Back at home, Karen was already waiting in front of the door. The moment Takasi arrived, she immediately demanded that now the transfer exam was finally over, he had to explain the truth about his body to her. Takasi casually asked what she was talking about, but Karen refused to let him play dumb. She insisted that something had definitely happened to him on the battlefield because there was absolutely no way normal human strength could shatter asphalt with bare hands. Takasi casually tried brushing it off by claiming that his beloved sister had been going through a terrible situation, so adrenaline simply gave him enough strength to crack the ground open. However, Karen refused to believe such an explanation. She insisted she would not be fooled that easily. Even though she loved him deeply, Takasi still needed to answer her questions properly. Takasi continued trying to ignore the matter, but Natalie eventually stepped in and convinced him that he should just explain it already. She pointed out that after being suspected to that extent, there was probably no way left for him to keep hiding it. Takasi quietly admitted to himself that she was right. He honestly regretted the moment he punched through the asphalt because he knew Karen would definitely question him afterward. He then told Karen that he appreciated how she waited until after the exam to bring it up. As expected of a refined Japanese lady, she was incredibly considerate. However, he also asked her to promise that she would keep everything secret from their parents because he did not want to make them worry any more than they already had. Karen quietly agreed. Takasi then asked Karen how much she actually knew about the war itself. Karen explained that the only thing she really knew was that space invaders had attacked. She had desperately searched the internet trying to confirm whether Takun was safe, but no information about him or the war ever appeared online. Natalie immediately reacted, realizing that information had clearly been heavily regulated. Meanwhile, Takashi quietly thought to himself that Karen truly knew almost nothing about what really happened during the war. If he carelessly explained too much, there was even a chance the military would place Karen under supervision as well. He found himself unable to decide how much he could safely tell her without causing even more problems. Takashi finally decided to speak honestly and immediately got straight to the point. He explained that both he and Natalie had their bodies modified by the military in order to thoroughly annihilate the aliens. Karen was stunned by the word modified. Takashi continued explaining that realistically, it would have been strange for middle school students like them to simply be sent onto the battlefield normally. Because of that, the military had selected humans with special aptitude to undergo modification procedures. Karen nervously questioned whether being modified meant that he had become some kind of machine. Takashi calmly explained that there were indeed soldiers who had been mechanized, but his own case was slightly different. Instead, he had taken various things into his body in order to drastically increase his physical abilities. Even while hearing all of that, Karen continued holding Takashi's hand. It still felt warm and soft like always. She quietly asked what he meant by taking in various things, but Takashi could not bring himself to explain that part any further. In Takashi's memories, he recalled the truth that he had absorbed a massive amount of alien cells into his body. Thinking about it calmly now, the military had truly done whatever they wanted without hesitation. He could only think that they had completely thrown away their conscience as human beings. However, at the same time, he also understood that they probably had no other choice if humanity wanted to survive. Karen then asked whether becoming modified was the reason Takashi became that strong. Before he could properly answer, Natalie happily jumped into the conversation and proudly declared that it was not just because of the modifications. Takashi himself was simply incredible from the beginning. Natalie explained that even among all the soldiers, Takashi's adaptability had been overwhelmingly exceptional. He passed every enhancement drug test without suffering any side effects at all. Through those modifications, Takashi gained abnormal physical strength and insane durability, eventually becoming humanity's trump card in the war against the aliens. He became so famous that people even started calling him the ultimate arrival point. Natalie continued proudly talking about Takashi's unbelievable achievements during the war. According to her, the entire state of the battlefield changed dramatically after Takashi joined the fight. Takashi had already tried stopping her once, but Natalie kept going anyway, mentioning that if Takashi had not been present during the Deneb Retreat battle or the Gulf Strait defense battle, she herself would have. Before she could finish, Takashi smacked her lightly and warned her not to casually reveal military secrets like that. Afterward, Takashi reassured Karen that everything was fine while quietly realizing that she had definitely underestimated how tightly the military controlled information. Karen then looked directly at Takashi and nervously asked whether he was still human. Takashi understood exactly why she would ask something like that. He smiled slightly before jokingly asking what she would do if he admitted he was actually a monster. Karen immediately started tearing up, but she firmly replied that it would not change anything. While she had been peacefully living her normal life, unimaginable things had been happening to him behind the scenes all this time. No matter what kind of body Takashi had now, he was still family to her. The same went for Natalie and Nason. Karen tightly hugged both of them while declaring in her heart that regardless of what Takashi had become, he had continued fighting all this time for the sake of his family. And now, this time, she would absolutely protect them instead. Both Takashi and Natalie looked genuinely surprised by Karen's sudden determination, while Karen quietly thanked Takashi from the bottom of her heart. Natalie happily declared that Karen was truly a wonderful person and admitted how happy she felt hearing all of that. Takashi then smiled and pointed out that from now on, the three of them would finally be attending the same high school as Karen together. He confidently declared that it was definitely going to be fun. Now that everything had finally been resolved, all that remained was to enjoy an ordinary and fun high school life together. At least, that was what Takashi believed at the time. However, looking back on it later, he realized he might have been seriously naive. Karen was suddenly called over by her mother, who revealed that she had found a boy's underwear inside Karen's room earlier that morning. Karen immediately panicked and insisted that it had to be some kind of mistake, but her mother completely rejected that excuse. Disappointed, her mother questioned what exactly Karen was trying to do with her own blood-related brother. Karen stubbornly argued that things like that were completely normal and that everyone did it anyway. However, her mother angrily grabbed the underwear and demanded that Karen stop immediately. She scolded her for shamelessly lusting after her own younger brother and reminded her that Takun clearly only saw her as family. Karen immediately covered her ears and refused to listen anymore. Still furious, her mother firmly declared that Takashi was absolutely off limits and that she would never allow such a relationship. Karen immediately argued back that she did not need permission because the matter was only between her and Takuin. Her mother then shouted that Karen should choose literally any other guy besides Takashi. With Karen's appearance, there were already countless boys interested in her anyway. However, Karen stubbornly insisted that Takuin was the only person she wanted. Right then, a sound suddenly came from outside the house. Her mother informed her that she had a visitor. Karen was surprised because she thought her classmates were not supposed to come anywhere near their home anymore. When she went to check, the visitor turned out to be Fumika. Fumika happily greeted Karen after not seeing her for quite a while. She excitedly explained that Owagami had already moved away and was no longer around anymore. Because of that, she hoped Karen could finally come back to school with everyone again since all their classmates had been waiting for her return. Fumika had been Takuin's childhood friend for a long time, and Karen quietly thought it was sweet of her to come all the way there just to inform her about Owagami. Karen then replied that it really did seem like Owagami had properly moved away already, so maybe they really could attend school together again. However, Fumika immediately looked confused and questioned how Karen already knew about it. Karen suddenly became unable to answer. No matter what happened, she could never reveal that Takuin had personally threatened Owagami into leaving town. If strange rumors started spreading because of that, they could easily become shackles that would ruin the peaceful and normal life Takuin was finally about to begin. Karen tried to explain herself somehow, but before she could say anything, her mother suddenly came out holding one of Karen's books from her room and demanded an explanation for it. Karen immediately panicked and shouted at her mother for taking her things without permission. However, her mother loudly pointed out that the entire book was filled with content involving being dominated by a younger brother. Karen desperately begged her not to read the contents out loud, but her mother continued angrily exposing how every story inside had incredibly vivid developments. Karen quickly pointed out that they still had a guest standing there, causing Fumika to awkwardly announce that she would come visit another time instead. Karen hurriedly tried to stop her and explain things properly, but Fumika already ran away. Meanwhile, her mother continued reading through the book in disgust. To make things even worse, the younger brothers appearing inside the stories were all named things suspiciously close to Takashi's name, like Tadasi, Taken, and Taisher. Her mother could only scold Karen for being a complete idiot while Karen desperately begged her once again not to read the contents out loud. In the end, Karen still could not bring herself to tell Fumika that Takuin had already returned home. Takashi and Natalie walked together through the neighborhood while Natalie questioned whether it was really okay for her to tag along since he was about to reunite with an old friend. Takashi immediately assured her that it was completely fine because he wanted to introduce Natalie to him properly. Natalie then questioned whether making friends was really that important in the first place. Takashi explained that it was still far better than transferring schools and ending up with nobody else to talk to besides him. However, Natalie worried that she might accidentally say something inappropriate or fail to read the mood properly. Takashi reassured her not to worry because even if she slipped up somehow, he would back her up no matter what. Satisfied with that answer, Natalie confidently accepted the plan. Eventually, the two of them stopped in front of a house. Takashi quietly stared at it. 3 years ago, he used to casually visit that house all the time. Whenever they had free time together, they would play games, read manga, laugh at stupid things, and spend hours having completely meaningless conversations. Natalie noticed his expression and quietly asked why he looked like he was about to cry. She wondered if they had really been that close. Takashi thought about it for a moment before admitting that the relationship probably felt similar to how he was with Natalie now. Natalie seemed genuinely surprised that Takashi would compare someone to her that highly. Takashi then described his friend as someone amazing at both sports and academics, someone he genuinely admired like an idol. Natalie immediately argued that sports were useless on the battlefield and proudly declared that she was definitely better at studying instead. Takashi questioned what exactly she was trying to compete over now, but Natalie stubbornly demanded that he call her his idol too. Takashi casually admitted that he loved that shameless side of her. At that moment, the front door suddenly opened. A young man stepped outside, and Takashi immediately joked about how weak he still was in the mornings, wondering whether he had stayed up late again or just slept too early. The young man's name was Rinji. The moment Rinji properly recognized Takashi, his eyes widened in shock. He immediately grabbed him to make sure he was really there. Takashi smiled calmly and admitted that he had managed to make it back alive. Rinji instantly teared up and tightly hugged him. He hurriedly asked when Takashi had returned to Japan. Takashi casually explained that it had been about a month already, which only made Rinji angrily call him an idiot for not contacting him sooner. Takashi apologized honestly for making him worry that much, but Rinji immediately denied that he was trying to blame him. More than anything, he simply believed Takashi should have come to see him immediately after returning. Looking at Rinji crying like that, Takashi quietly realized he had made him worry far more than he originally thought. He honestly should have contacted him much sooner. Rinji then suddenly noticed Natalie standing nearby and questioned who the blonde girl was, immediately suspecting that she might be Takasi's girlfriend. Natalie instantly flushed in embarrassment before proudly complimenting Rinji for having a good eye. She even declared that she might make him one of her underlings someday. Takasi immediately told her to calm down while casually calling her an idiot before properly introducing Natalie as his comrade from the battlefield. Rinji then happily invited both of them inside the house, while Takasi politely apologized for intruding. Inside, the three of them spent time looking through old photographs together. Eventually, Takasi mentioned to Natalie that it was probably about time for them to head to the next house they planned to visit. The moment he said that, Rinji visibly became sad and quietly asked whether he was already leaving. Takasi quickly explained that he was transferring into the same school anyway, meaning they would now see each other every single day from now on. He told Rinji not to make such a lonely face. However, watching Rinji react like that made Takasi realize how difficult reunions and separations really were. At the same time, he genuinely did not know how to cheer him up properly. Then Rinji quietly confessed that ever since Takasi disappeared, he had continued buying the weekly shonen magazine Takasi used to love every single week without fail. He also kept buying the yearly pro baseball game series because he knew Takasi always liked playing it too, although he admitted that this year's version was especially terrible. More than anything, Rinji wanted Takasi to know that he could come over and hang out again anytime he wanted. He even tearfully admitted that he would cancel every single plan he had if Takasi ever came to visit again. Seeing Rinji cry like that, Takasi quietly thanked him from the bottom of his heart. Before leaving, the two of them tightly hugged each other once more. After that, Takasi and Natalie arrived at a house surrounded by plants. Takasi greeted the woman who came outside, causing her to turn toward him in surprise. He asked whether Fumika was home, while the woman questioned whether he was one of Fumika's friends. Takasi casually replied that if she meant Fumi, then yes. The woman immediately became shocked and hurriedly told him to wait there because she would return right away before quickly rushing back inside the house. Moments later, her loud voice echoed through the house as she urgently called for Fumika to come downstairs immediately. However, Fumika replied that she could not take her hands off what she was doing at the moment and asked to leave it for later. The woman angrily questioned what Fumika was even talking about before ordering her to stop whatever it was and come downstairs immediately. When Fumika finally came down, she froze in shock the moment she saw Takasi standing there. Slowly walking down the stairs, she approached him before tightly holding on to him while crying. She welcomed him home and admitted that she had been waiting for him all this time. Fumika immediately started suggesting that they celebrate together because there were many things she wanted to show him. Takasi calmly responded that he was finally home and gently asked whether she had been doing well. Fumika quietly mumbled that he should simply stay over already because that sounded better. She then softly muttered that she had already prepared everything perfectly for him, so he could leave everything to her and just relax. Takasi smiled slightly and remarked that she was still exactly the same as always. The fact that Fumika had not changed at all honestly felt nostalgic to him. At that moment, Natalie suddenly commented that Takasi was truly loved by the people around him. Hearing another girl's voice for the first time, Fumika became confused and quietly wondered who she was. She then directly asked Takasi who Natalie was, while Natalie casually asked whether she was referring to her. Natalie then proudly introduced herself as Shibasaki Natalie and boldly declared that she was Takasi's life. Fumika became completely confused hearing that statement, while Takasi immediately realized that Natalie had seriously done it this time. Natalie casually reminded him that she had already warned him earlier that she might accidentally say something inappropriate and told him to act like a man and back her up somehow. Inside his head, Takasi immediately realized that this was the absolute worst possible situation. The entire reason they came there was to help Fumika become friends with Natalie, but Fumika was an extremely serious and fastidious girl who never treated jokes as simple jokes. On top of that, impure heterosexual relationships were exactly the kind of thing overly serious Fumika hated the most. Meanwhile, Natalie casually remarked that this situation was Takasi's fault for flirting with another woman and even suggested letting everything turn into a complete bloodbath. Takasi immediately became annoyed, feeling like Natalie was trampling all over the kindness he had shown her. However, he quickly decided that if things had already escalated this far, then he would simply handle it his own way and properly persuade Fumika himself. Fumika then quietly asked Takasi what Natalie meant by calling herself his wife. Without hesitation, Takasi suddenly pulled Natalie closer and seriously explained to Fumika that Natalie had been telling the truth. He declared that the two of them were in a serious relationship built on the intention of eventually getting married. Fumika stood there completely dumbfounded. Even Natalie herself looked shocked because that was not the response she expected at all. She immediately protested, insisting that this was the exact moment he was supposed to deny everything and come up with some pathetic excuse instead. However, Takase calmly continued pushing forward, insisting that he genuinely loved Natalie and had already carefully planned out their future together. While speaking, he even held Natalie's chin confidently. Fumika desperately insisted that everything had to be some kind of mistake. Natalie immediately agreed with her and hurriedly tried reassuring Fumika that it was all just a practical joke and that Takase was merely playing along with her teasing. She repeatedly insisted that everything was fake and meant as a joke in order to calm Fumika down. However, Takase stubbornly denied that explanation and insisted that none of it was a joke at all. He openly declared that he and Natalie shared an extremely close and messy relationship together. Natalie could barely believe what she was hearing anymore and internally wondered whether Takase was actually an idiot. She furiously questioned how he could act like such a shameless moron so naturally. Meanwhile, poor Fumika became even more confused because she no longer knew which one of them was actually telling the truth. Natalie desperately insisted that she was the honest one, but Takase immediately countered by revealing that the two of them even lived together already. Hearing that statement, Fumika completely misunderstood the situation. Natalie hurriedly explained that she and Takase were not actually living together like that and that she was basically just freeloading at his place. However, Takase only continued teasing the two girls by pointing out that when a teenage boy and girl spend an entire month together in the same room, there was obviously no way nothing would happen between them. Natalie immediately exploded in embarrassment and angrily demanded that he stop already. Eventually, Natalie completely gave up trying to defend herself and suddenly started sobbing instead. Meanwhile, Fumika admitted that she still did not fully understand the situation, but there was at least one thing she clearly understood now. Takase was absolutely toying with Natalie. Feeling sympathy for her, Fumika gently helped Natalie stand up before quietly hugging her. Later, while heading back home together, Natalie complained that Takase had made things incredibly difficult for her. Takase casually questioned why it was somehow his fault, but Natalie replied that all she originally wanted was to watch a dramatic bloodbath like something straight out of a daytime soap opera. When they returned home, Karen happily welcomed them and excitedly announced that the results for the transfer exam had finally arrived. Takase nervously held the envelope in his hands while Natalie looked visibly excited beside him. The moment they opened the paper, they immediately saw that both of them had passed. The two of them instantly started screaming and jumping around in celebration. Takase honestly felt relieved because opening that envelope had practically given him a heart attack. If he had failed after everything, he would not have been able to face the heroes who fought alongside him. At that moment, a memory resurfaced inside his mind. Someone from the battlefield had once told him to enjoy peaceful daily life for their sake too. After calming down, Takase decided that he should properly report the news to the Director General. He called her and casually greeted her while jokingly asking whether she was still alive. The Director General replied that she was still alive, and Takase happily informed her that he had passed the exam and would officially become a normal high school student starting next month. The director warmly congratulated him and praised him for doing something amazing. For Takase, it was probably the first truly peaceful and ordinary report he had ever given her. The war had already ended, so peace should have been expected now. Still, Takase quietly asked how things were on her side and whether she was doing all right. The Director General answered that she herself was fine, but then hesitated slightly before mentioning Sherry. Takase immediately questioned whether something had happened. The director explained that it was nothing major, but she wanted to know whether he had received any contact from Sherry recently. Takase replied that he had not heard anything from her at all. After hearing that answer, the director simply responded that it was fine. Takase then remembered Sherry, one of the biggest troublemakers from the battlefield who rivaled Natalie for the number 1 or number 2 spot in causing chaos. After the war ended, Sherry had also returned to her hometown. Takase quietly hoped she was spending peaceful days somewhere now. Finally, the Director General told him to properly enjoy his high school life from now on before ending the call. At last, the peaceful high school life Takase had always dreamed about was finally within reach. From now on, he intended to fully enjoy ordinary everyday life. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a mysterious woman quietly watched everything from afar while calmly observing that this was the Japan where Takase lived. Natalie happily showed off her school uniform while asking whether it looked cute on her. Karen immediately smiled and praised her honestly, saying that the uniform suited Natalie perfectly, that she looked adorable, and that she resembled a doll wearing it. Hearing that praise made Natalie blush slightly. Meanwhile, Takase quietly stared at Natalie for a moment before looking again, unable to stop thinking how strange the situation felt. This was the same Natalie who had once been feared across the battlefield as the very end point of life itself. The same Natalie who terrified even hardened soldiers so badly that rumors claimed people needed diapers just to stand in front of her. And now, that exact same girl had simply put on a school uniform and somehow become cute. Natalie teasingly questioned whether Takase had fallen in love with her all over again. However, Takasi immediately became defensive and insisted that she was clearly using some kind of weird magic because there was no way someone who was normally just Natalie could suddenly become like this. He also stubbornly claimed that she should save her bragging until after she saw him in his own uniform because he would definitely end up looking cuter anyway. Karen immediately told him to stop dodging the issue and honestly compliment Natalie properly. Meanwhile, Natalie casually took a photo of herself with her phone while mentioning that she planned to send a picture of her super cute uniform to Sherry. The moment Takasi heard Sherry's name, his eyes widened in surprise as he immediately questioned whether Natalie actually had Sherry's contact information. He quickly asked her to share it with him too. Karen then asked whether Sherry had also been one of their friends from the military. Takasi explained that she really was their friend, and because the three of them were close in age, they used to spend a lot of time together back then. Natalie immediately clarified that Sherry was strictly just a friend and emphasized that point carefully. After that, she confidently declared that she herself was Takasi's wife instead. That statement instantly made Karen furious as she loudly insisted that she was the one who should be considered Takuin's wife. Trying to move past the chaos, Karen then asked Takasi whether all of his friends were from overseas and wondered if he could actually speak English too. Takasi casually replied that he could speak English, Chinese, and Spanish, leaving Karen completely amazed. Takasi then explained that all special biosoldiers naturally possessed extremely strong memory abilities. According to him, Natalie could memorize in just 3 minutes what normally took him 3 entire days to learn. He even pointed out that while he had desperately studied just to pass into a public school, Natalie had actually been studying for a national technical college instead. And on top of all that, she had done it in Japanese, which was not even her native language. Karen could only stare at Natalie in complete shock and admiration. Afterward, Natalie quietly stared down at her phone for a while, causing Takasi to ask whether something was wrong. Natalie explained that Sherry had been sending strange messages she did not really understand, and it completely ruined her mood. Annoyed, she tossed her phone onto the couch and declared that it was too troublesome, so she would simply pretend she never saw the messages at all. Takasi looked confused by her reaction and wondered what exactly that was supposed to mean. Then he suddenly remembered that even the Director General had mentioned Sherry recently too. Karen immediately asked whether something strange might actually be happening over there involving Sherry. Meanwhile, Takasi quietly wondered what Sherry was doing right now. At the same time, Takasi stood in front of the mirror fixing his uniform tie while quietly realizing that their high school life was finally beginning today. He nervously asked Natalie and Karen whether his tie looked strange or if it looked normal. Karen happily reassured him that nothing looked weird at all and that the uniform honestly suited him very well. Natalie also excitedly admitted that she was really looking forward to starting school. Even so, Takasi kept staring at himself in the mirror and repeatedly questioned whether everything looked normal from every angle. Karen could only laugh lightly and tell him that he was worrying far too much. However, deep inside his mind, Takasi remembered that the day after the acceptance letter arrived, he had already made a mistake because of something he chose to do, believing at the time that it had been for the best. In Takasi's memory, his mother warmly congratulated him for passing the transfer exam. She then handed both him and Natalie their school uniforms along with the latest smartphones. Takasi looked genuinely surprised that the uniforms had already been prepared because the acceptance letter had only arrived the day before. His mother explained that every single year, she had continued asking the school in advance so everything could be prepared immediately the day after he finally returned home. She never wanted his transfer to be delayed because he had already gone through more than enough hardships. From now on, she wanted him to rely on his mother as much as he wanted. Takasi became speechless hearing that. His mother then mentioned that she was about to transfer the admission fee and asked him to show her the necessary documents. However, Takasi explained that he had already paid the fees himself earlier using his military salary, including buying his own smartphone too. He honestly never expected his mother to purchase one for him separately. In the military, taking care of oneself had simply become natural. Hearing that only made his mother scold him further, insisting that he should not be using his own money for things like that. She reminded him that both she and his father were still properly working and earning money, so he needed to rely on them more instead of handling everything alone. As Takasi reflected on the memory, he quietly realized that his common sense had truly changed a lot over the past 3 years. Even though he wanted to become a proper son from now on, he honestly felt hopeless at it. At that moment, Natalie called out to him, warning that if he did not hurry up, they would leave him behind. Takasi quickly replied that he was coming. As the group walked towards school together, Takasi quietly reminded himself that he needed to start acting more like a normal kid. Starting today, he was finally just an ordinary high school student. Meanwhile, inside the classroom, students were already noisily talking among themselves. A group of friends discussed how today was finally the day the transfer students would arrive, while others admitted they could not wait to meet them. One boy proudly mentioned that he had even downloaded a translation app just for today. immediately causing several other students to decide they should download one too. The class kept buzzing with excitement. Some girls talked about how a returning Japanese boy and an international girl were supposedly transferring in together, while others wondered what kind of people they would actually be like. The boys had their own discussions too. One of them mentioned hearing rumors that the transfer girl was incredibly cute. One boy excitedly hoped the transfer students would arrive soon, but one of the girls immediately interrupted, worried that if such a cute girl really came, Amano-kun might end up being stolen away from them. The other girls instantly reacted strongly against the idea. None of them wanted anyone taking Amano away. Right at that moment, Amano himself entered the classroom and immediately noticed the girls gossiping about him again. After sitting down, he was instantly surrounded by questions. One girl asked what he thought about the incoming transfer students, but Amano casually replied that he honestly did not care much and questioned why everyone was making such a huge fuss over them in the first place. Another girl explained that a super cute girl was coming and asked whether he really was not excited at all. Amano calmly responded that Class D was already filled with cute girls anyway, so adding one more would not really change anything. That smooth response instantly made all the girls blush. Eventually, the teacher entered the classroom and called for everyone's attention. She announced that the transfer students had arrived. The entire class immediately waited in anticipation. Then Natalie stepped into the classroom. The moment everyone saw her, the room instantly fell silent as students stared in shock. The teacher then asked the transfer students to introduce themselves. Natalie energetically greeted the class with a bright smile, and the entire room immediately erupted into cheers. The students quickly started praising her appearance, calling her doll-like and comparing her to an angel descending from heaven. Meanwhile, Takashi also introduced himself properly and greeted everyone politely, hoping to attract at least some attention too. Later during break time, nearly the entire class gathered around Natalie. One girl asked what country Natalie had studied abroad in, but Natalie casually replied that it was a secret. That mysterious answer only made the students praise her even more. They complimented how fluent her Japanese sounded and pointed out that even her pronunciation was nearly perfect. Natalie proudly bragged that she had studied Japanese incredibly hard. That only earned her even more compliments, with classmates praising her for being cute, smart, amazing, and practically perfect. Takashi quietly observed Natalie from a distance and thought that she genuinely looked like she was having fun. Seeing that honestly made him glad he invited her to school with him. At the same time, he could not help thinking that everyone seemed so obsessed with his Natalie that nobody even noticed him anymore. After that, he quietly walked away. Once classes ended, several girls immediately gathered around Natalie. One invited her to walk home together, another suggested visiting a cute cafe near the station, while someone else proposed throwing a welcome party for her. Natalie glanced toward Takashi for help, but he casually told her to go ahead because he planned to explore the school on his own for a while. Natalie clearly wanted to escape the situation somehow, but with everyone surrounding her, she had no choice but to go along with it. Meanwhile, Takashi quietly wandered through the school grounds while thinking that extroverts really had it nice. As for him, he planned to simply enjoy things at his own pace. Eventually, he stopped near the baseball field and quietly watched the baseball club practicing. During practice, one of the balls rolled near him, and the team signaled for him to throw it back. Takashi casually picked up the ball and lightly tossed it back toward them. The player caught it perfectly, and the team thanked him. Takashi then quietly stared at his own hand, suddenly realizing that he no longer needed to use that terrifying power anymore. And that was fine. Right now, he was no different from any of the other students around him. He was simply a normal high school student. Later that evening, Takashi headed home while wondering whether Natalie had already returned before him. However, the moment he arrived home, he froze in shock at the scene waiting for him. Karen immediately ran toward him crying, desperately explaining that things had become completely chaotic. She hurriedly told him that someone named Seal had suddenly arrived at their house and was causing a huge commotion while demanding that Takashi come outside. The moment Takashi heard the name Seal, the very first person that came to his mind was Sherry. He instantly realized just how bad the situation was becoming and quickly asked whether the loud noises were coming from the yard. Just as he tried heading there, Karen immediately stopped him and warned him that it was dangerous. Takashi quickly asked Karen if she had happened to see whether those were really the people beating each other up outside. Karen could only cry in confusion while desperately questioning what exactly was happening. Then, the moment they stepped outside, the unbelievable scene finally came into view. Sherry and Natalie were violently fighting each other. Smoke surrounded their bodies from the sheer intensity of the battle as the two girls exchanged powerful and brutal punches without holding back. Takashi stood there completely caught off guard. At that moment, he could almost hear the sound of his peaceful daily life crumbling apart. Natalie and Sherry had completely gotten on each other's nerves. As Takashi watched them fighting, he quietly thought that the two of them looked like they had completely snapped. They were even using the trump card abilities of special bio soldiers against each other. Takasi tried to stop them, but neither Natalie nor Sherry showed any intention of backing down as they continued exchanging violent attacks. Takasi then calmly told Karen that the two of them would never stop unless he personally stepped in. Karen immediately panicked and tried stopping him, terrified that he would end up dying if he got involved. However, Takasi reassured her that everything would be fine because he was capable of doing the same thing as them. The atmosphere around Takasi's body suddenly shifted. Then he calmly walked directly toward the middle of the battle and firmly ordered both of them to knock it off already. Natalie and Sherry finally stopped moving, but even then, they still continued loudly arguing with each other instead. Natalie angrily insisted that none of this was her fault because Sherry had suddenly attacked her out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Sherry accused Natalie of trying to get ahead of her. Natalie immediately denied the accusation and yelled at her not to make up weird assumptions, but Sherry stubbornly argued that it was not a false accusation at all. Takasi then decided to ignore the argument for a moment and calmly asked Sherry whether something had happened. After all, she had traveled all the way to his house, so he wondered if there was some important reason she needed to see him. The moment Takasi asked that, Sherry's expression suddenly changed. She tearfully admitted that she had been waiting the entire time for him to return to the military and directly asked when he planned on coming back. However, Takasi calmly answered that he had absolutely no intention of returning there anymore. Hearing that immediately made Sherry start tearing up. She explained that Director Garnet had told her Takasi only returned home temporarily and that he would eventually come back. His name had even remained registered within the military. Takasi explained that the only reason his name remained there was because the military never would have allowed him to return to Japan otherwise. Natalie casually added that the Director General often told strange lies like that too. Sherry then quietly asked whether Takasi truly planned to stay in Japan forever, and Takasi honestly answered yes. At that point, Sherry completely broke down crying, insisting that it was cruel and far too much for her to accept. Takasi became confused and asked what exactly was wrong. He even turned toward Natalie to see whether she knew anything about the situation already. Natalie replied that she had not heard anything at all and casually complained that Sherry was being annoying again before suggesting they should just send her back to the military already. However, Takasi stopped her and pointed out that they should at least listen to Sherry's side of the story first because it clearly seemed like she had her own circumstances. Afterward, all of them sat down together at the table. Takasi calmly asked Sherry once again whether something had happened. Sherry quietly answered that she had purchased a house. According to her, it was a white house with a large yard. Takasi looked genuinely surprised and admitted that she had done something extremely bold. Sherry then explained that she had spent her entire fortune buying the house because she wanted the three of them to live there together happily after the war finally ended. That revelation completely shocked both Takasi and Natalie. Sherry explained that now that the war and all the alien debris were finally gone, she believed they could all peacefully live together in that house from now on. However, Natalie had sent her a picture together with the message claiming that she was going to high school together with Takasi and asking whether Sherry was jealous. Realizing how badly that message had affected her, Natalie quietly apologized to Sherry. Takasi quietly asked Sherry whether she had not returned to her hometown after the war ended. Sherry explained that there was no reason for her to go back because she did not have any relatives waiting for her there. Hearing that immediately made Natalie realize that the situation was completely different from what the Director General had told them. If that was really the case, then Natalie believed they should have simply invited Sherry to come live in Japan with them from the beginning. That realization instantly made Sherry furious. Takasi also explained that the Director General had told him Sherry was happily living in her hometown together with her lover. He had even been warned not to forcefully involve himself with her anymore, so he quietly asked whether any of that was actually true. Sherry immediately denied everything in anger, insisting that none of it was true at all and that she had never even had a lover before in her entire life. The unfairness of the situation completely overwhelmed her, and she finally started breaking down emotionally. Karen gently comforted Sherry beside her, softly reassuring her that things must have been really painful. After hearing the full story, Natalie guessed that the military probably lied to Sherry in order to keep her trapped there. Even for them, the cruelty of it all was honestly too terrible to laugh about. Takasi then asked Sherry how much the house had cost her. Sherry answered that it had been around $2.5 million. Hearing that amount made Takasi immediately decide that he would negotiate with the military and force them to buy the house back from her somehow. He also mentioned that he would contact his father and mother too before asking Sherry whether she could wait a little longer. Sherry looked genuinely shocked by his response. Takasi then calmly declared that from now on, Sherry would live together with them as well. The moment she heard that, Sherry tightly hugged him and openly declared how much she loved him. After that, Karen politely introduced herself to Sherry and warmly greeted her. Sherry happily reacted after realizing that Karen was Takasi's older sister before introducing herself properly too. She explained that she was a mixed 11-type and Y-type special biosoldier named Seal Iceland, although Karen could simply call her Sherry instead. Karen immediately became confused by terms like mixed Y-type. Natalie then casually explains to Sherry that ordinary people would not understand anything even if they started listing military model types like that. According to Natalie, simplifying explanations was one of Takasi's personal policies. Karen then brought up something she noticed earlier during the fight between Natalie and Sherry. She explained that there had been something resembling smoke drifting around their bodies and asked what exactly it had been. Natalie casually responded that it was not exactly a fun topic, so it would honestly be better if Karen did not ask too deeply about it. However, Karen firmly explained that she was not simply asking out of curiosity. More than anything, she was genuinely worried about their bodies and wanted to know whether the military modifications had caused them any physical problems. Karen nervously asked whether there were any aftereffects from the modifications, whether their lifespans had been shortened, or whether their bodies had developed defects because of everything they went through. Hearing that concern immediately surprised Sherry. She quietly admitted that she never expected Karen to worry about them instead of being afraid of them. Natalie then calmly reassured Karen that there were absolutely no aftereffects from the modifications. The only real downside for her personally was that she became hungry much more easily than normal. Sherry then explained that the smoke-like substance Karen saw was called a film. It was basically treated as part of their bodies, so it did not really create any harmful effects on its own. Natalie continued explaining that modified soldiers were divided into 4 different types, all of which fell under the category of special biosoldiers. The modifications had to be repeatedly administered over and over again, meaning only a very small number of humans actually possessed the aptitude required to survive them. That was also why their combat abilities became overwhelmingly powerful. Natalie then casually pointed out that Sherry's 11-type administration was especially abnormal even among special biosoldiers. Sherry immediately argued back and pointed out that Natalie herself had undergone A-type administration over 100 times already, despite the fact that Natalie was strong enough to rip apart H-beams using her bare hands. Finally, Sherry quietly reminded Karen that everything they discussed there needed to remain a secret from ordinary people. Karen sincerely thanked both Natalie and Sherry for honestly telling her everything. Takasi later returned and informed Sherry that she could give the military her account number afterward because the Director General had agreed to pay the entire amount for the house. Sherry immediately became happy hearing that and excitedly questioned whether it was really true. With that problem solved, she felt like she could finally enjoy high school life peacefully without any worries anymore. However, Takasi quickly reminded her that all of that only mattered if she actually passed the transfer exam first. The moment she heard that, Sherry immediately reacted and suggested that they should simply negotiate with the military and force the school admission procedures through because studying for the exam sounded like far too much trouble. Natalie instantly burst into laughter and pointed out that Sherry had said the exact same thing Natalie herself suggested before. Takasi quietly realized that things around him were only going to become even noisier from now on. He then explained to Sherry that if they handled things through military influence, people would quickly realize they were returnees from the war, which would only make them stand out in a bad way. More than anything, Takasi genuinely wanted to live an ordinary high school life. Hearing that made Sherry point out that those words did not sound like something a triumphant returning soldier would normally say. Meanwhile, elsewhere at Star Model Production, a young girl was being harshly scolded. She was called a peace-addled slowpoke who could not even properly pour a drink. The girl tearfully apologized while trembling. The man then asked whether Kikigahara Rinko had not arrived yet because she was the one most fitting for a triumphant atmosphere like this. Later after school, Natalie complained that she was hungry and asked Takasi to stop by a beef bowl restaurant on the way home. Takasi agreed and wondered whether they should invite Sherry too, but Natalie immediately suggested leaving her alone for now because she was currently studying hard for her transfer exam. Takasi admitted that interrupting her studying would probably be a bad idea. As the two of them continued walking, they suddenly noticed a huge poster featuring Rinko. Natalie immediately pointed out that this was the same girl Takasi had mentioned before. Takasi confirmed it and explained that alongside Rinji and Fumika, Rinko was another one of his closest friends. He wanted to properly introduce Natalie to her someday, but no matter where he went, Rinko was always away working somewhere. She was probably constantly busy with modeling jobs and photo shoots. Takasi then quietly remembered how Rinko used to get teased throughout elementary school because of how tall she was. Yet now, she had grown into a charismatic and successful model. While Takasi had been fighting on the battlefield all this time, Rinko had also been working hard in her own world. Suddenly, Natalie called out to Takasi and pointed out that the actual Rinko had just walked past them. Other people nearby had also started noticing her presence. Takasi immediately realized it really was her, so the two of them quickly called out to her and approached. The moment they got closer, Natalie immediately commented that Rinko looked like she was about to collapse from exhaustion. Takasi also noticed the same thing and asked whether she was alright. Seeing how unresponsive Rinko looked, Natalie casually suggested that she probably would not even notice if someone played a prank on her right now. Natalie even joked that she might try kissing her. Takashi immediately refused and declared that he would never allow Natalie to prank Rinko like that. Then, without hesitation, he jokingly added that if anyone was going to kiss Rinko first, it would obviously be him. The moment those words came out, Rinko instantly snapped out of her daze and smacked Takashi while angrily telling him to stop saying disgusting things and calling him an idiot. Rather than getting upset, Takashi only smiled nostalgically and admitted that this exact feeling reminded him of the old days because Rinko used to hit him like this all the time 3 years ago. Rinko suddenly froze in place. In complete disbelief, she questioned why Takashi was alive at all because she had believed he was dead. Takashi only laughed at her reaction and pointed out that those were not exactly the kinds of words someone normally said to a friend they had not seen in years. Still, the sharpness and harshness in Rinko's personality honestly felt nostalgic to him too. In a strange way, it even made his heart skip a beat. Natalie immediately pointed out that Takashi really did love harsh women just as much as ever. Rinko still stared at Takashi in disbelief, unable to fully accept that it was really him standing there alive. At the same time, she remained deeply confused about the strange phone call she had received earlier. Takashi quietly noticed that Rinko was acting strangely. It did not feel like she was simply happy about their reunion or shocked that he survived. There was something else bothering her entirely. Rinko then anxiously explained that earlier, her manager had called her about a strange video. The moment she watched it, she immediately realized that the movements shown there were not human at all. Because of that, she instantly called her manager back and demanded to know what the video actually meant. However, the voice on the other side calmly responded that the movements belonged to the real Kikigahara Rinko. The moment Rinko heard that answer, she immediately questioned who the caller really was and asked what happened to her manager. The man on the phone casually reassured her not to worry because her manager had only fainted somewhere nearby. He then explained that they were survivors of the war against the debris. Their bodies had been modified on the battlefield, and after everything they sacrificed during the war, they had been told they could do whatever they wanted now. The moment Rinko heard the words war against the debris, she instantly realized that this was connected to the battlefield Takashi had once fought on. The man on the phone continued explaining that the war only ended because of their sacrifices. Then he coldly asked whether it was finally Rinko's turn to serve them now. Rinko angrily shouted into the phone that the war was already over before desperately asking about Takashi and what had happened to him. The man calmly answered that they were supposedly the only Japanese soldiers who survived. Then, without hesitation, he ordered Rinko to come immediately. If she failed to arrive within an hour, he threatened to kill everyone working inside her agency. Hearing all of that immediately caught Takashi's attention, especially the part about only Japanese soldiers remaining alive. He quietly asked Rinko whether the man truly said something like that. Rinko immediately started crying while insisting that he absolutely did say it. At the same time, she also admitted feeling relieved because it meant they had lied about Takashi being dead all this time. Still, she confessed that the entire conversation felt strange because the man kept using words she did not understand at all, such as debris and DOD. Takashi immediately asked who exactly used those terms, and Rinko answered that it was the man on the phone. Takashi then glanced toward Natalie. Natalie quietly pointed out that nobody in their unit normally used terms like DOD. She wondered whether the man might belong to a mainland military unit instead. However, Takashi immediately denied that possibility. Overdose biosoldiers were usually deployed directly to the front lines, so there should not have been anyone left in mainland units using those kinds of terms anymore. At that point, Rinko interrupted them in confusion and directly asked what exactly they meant by DOD and biosoldiers. Takashi quietly realized that it would be dangerous not to properly explain things anymore because Rinko was already being completely dragged into the situation. He then calmly explained that debris was the military's official name for the aliens. Meanwhile, DOD stood for debris overdose, which referred to body modification procedures performed on soldiers. Both terms were military secrets that had never been publicly revealed before. After piecing everything together, Takashi concluded that the man who contacted Rinko was highly likely connected to the military somehow. The three of them traveled down the road together while Rinko remained completely lost in thought. She could not properly understand anything anymore, and her mind was struggling to keep up with everything happening around her. Out of nowhere, she had suddenly received threats from a strange man over the phone, and then Takashi had unexpectedly appeared alive right in front of her again. In her memories from earlier that day, Takashi had explained that the man on the phone was highly likely connected to the military somehow. He originally planned to head to Rinko's agency himself while telling her to stay behind somewhere safe and simply wait. However, Rinko still ended up following them anyway. As they continued moving, Rinko suddenly asked whether the two of them were really going to be okay handling this situation by themselves. Even now, she still believed they should simply contact the police instead. Natalie calmly looked at her and reassured her that there was no need to worry because they were only going there to talk. If the people involved were truly connected to the military, then they would absolutely agree to negotiate things peacefully. Even after hearing that explanation, Rinko still could not properly describe what she was feeling. Being around Takashi and Natalie felt strangely similar to standing in front of extremely important people whose presence alone created pressure. After finishing the ride, Takashi casually asked the driver for the receipt. Natalie curiously asked why he needed it, and Takashi calmly replied that he planned to charge the military for it later since they were the reason all this trouble was happening in the first place. As the three of them started walking again, Natalie casually praised Takashi, admitting that his idea was not bad at all for someone as clumsy as him. Takashi confidently replied that he was improving every single day. Meanwhile, Rinko quietly observed the two of them and noticed how calm they remained even though they might be walking directly into danger. Eventually, they arrived at the agency building and searched around inside. Natalie suddenly announced that she had found the people they were looking for. Inside, a large group of intimidating men had taken over the place. One of them was grabbing Rinko's manager while the girls working there cried in fear nearby. The moment Rinko saw them, one of the gang members immediately called out to her. Their leader noticed that Rinko had brought other people along with her, while another gang member angrily questioned whether she thought she could do whatever she wanted. Natalie quietly asked Takashi whether he recognized any of them. Takashi calmly answered no because there were 6 men there altogether. Natalie then explained that all of them were machine soldiers and Zero-type special bio-soldiers. One long-haired man openly admitted that he actually preferred Natalie over Rinko instead. He approached Natalie directly and casually asked whether she would tell him her name. Natalie blinked in confusion and questioned whether he was seriously talking to her. The man casually confirmed it before inviting her to go have fun together with him. Natalie quietly mumbled in disbelief that he really was talking to her before immediately calling Takashi's attention and asking whether he heard what the man just said to her. Takashi calmly replied that he understood the situation now, while Natalie simply started laughing uncontrollably. Then Takashi coldly pointed out that those men sure acted arrogant despite never even participating in the actual war. The leader immediately became furious and ground his teeth together while demanding to know how Akashi figured that out. Takashi calmly explained that those men were likely drafted only the month before last. Since the war had already ended the following month, they must have been modified and then immediately sent back home without ever experiencing real combat. The entire group instantly became furious and demanded to know how Takashi could possibly know all of that. Takashi casually admitted that he himself had also been modified, leaving Rinko completely confused hearing the conversation unfold. Takashi then explained that Japan only drafted 6 soldiers once every 2 months, which perfectly matched the number of people standing there. More importantly, the fact that none of them recognized Natalie immediately exposed them as frauds. Takashi questioned whether they had any idea just how feared Natalie truly was during the war. Meanwhile, Natalie looked genuinely delighted by their fresh reactions. One of them immediately shouted back, questioning what if they really were heroes. The other proudly declared that they went to war for the sake of humanity, calling themselves heroes. To them, it was only natural for ordinary people to serve heroes. Takashi coldly pointed out that even though they had not fought a single battle yet, they still had the nerve to say something so disgusting. Rinko noticed the irritation in Takashi's voice, and that alone felt unusual. Takashi angrily told them that real heroes were the soldiers who scattered across the battlefield and died in war. If people like them ruined the reputation of soldiers, then the heroes who sacrificed their lives would never truly be rewarded. Rinko had never seen Takashi that angry before. One of the men snapped, yelling that some brat was talking back to adults, while another threatened to kill him. The group started stretching their arms, clearly preparing to start a fight. Natalie calmly asked Takashi if she should wear her film, but he replied that there was no need for opponents like them. He simply ordered Natalie to handle the 3 on the right. Natalie understood immediately and asked whether they should be taken dead or alive. Takashi told her not to kill them, because even if they were rotten people, they were still soldiers. Natalie praised him for being too kind, and Takashi quietly accepted it. Rinko watched the exchange in silence. The Takashi she knew had always been aloof yet kind. Her mind drifted back to the first time she met him as children. Takashi had called out to her, asking if she wanted to become friends with him. Because of her height, Rinko could barely hear him properly. At the same time, several boys passed by and mocked her for blocking the way because she was too tall. Another complained that she was too big to pass through. They continued bullying her, saying someone would get crushed by her size, while another muttered that she looked scary. As they walked through the hallway afterward, Rinko questioned whether Takashi really wanted to be friends with her or if he was simply making fun of her too. She told him not to talk to her so casually. Takashi casually replied that good things would happen if she became friends with him. He then insisted that if she agreed right now, the cute Fumika would come along too. Fumika nervously introduced herself, clearly uncomfortable. Rinko questioned what kind of setup this was, but Takashi bluntly told her to stop talking and just nod, asking if she really did not care about what happened to Fumika. Fumika was already crying and pleading, while Takashi continued pushing Rinko into becoming friends with them by saying Fumika was pitiful. Back then, Rinko genuinely thought the two of them were monsters. That had been Rinko's very first meeting with Takashi, and her first impression of him had been terrible. However, after a month passed since that forceful invitation, she realized Takashi and Fumika's relationship was not what she originally thought. She eventually understood that Fumika's mother had asked Takashi to help her make friends. Takashi probably could have approached her normally from the start, but even then, Rinko believed that if he had not forcefully dragged her into their circle, she would have remained alone forever. Deep down, she felt grateful to him. The flashback slowly faded away. Rinko then remembered the expression Takashi showed earlier when talking about the reputation of soldiers. That gentle Takashi was genuinely furious. At that moment, the long-haired man swung his fist toward them while cursing at the little brats in front of him. However, both Takashi and Natalie easily dodged the attack. Natalie instantly grabbed the man by the head and slammed him against the wall, leaving the others completely shocked. Everyone stared at the collapsed man in disbelief, and even Rinko was stunned. The soldiers could only think of Takashi and Natalie as monsters. One of the men suddenly grabbed the girl beside him, using her as leverage. Rinko immediately called out to Samire. The man threatened them, asking if they really did not care about what happened to her. In the next instant, Takashi moved directly in front of him, fiercely declaring that there was no way that was acceptable. He grabbed both of the man's arms so quickly that even the soldiers were shocked. Rinko could not understand what she had just seen. Just a few seconds ago, Takashi had been standing right beside her. Those movements were beyond human. Takashi apologized to Samire and gently asked her to step away for a moment. Takashi tightened his grip around the man's metal arm, nearly crushing it with sheer force alone. Several soldiers watched the scene in complete disbelief. Then, in the very next instant, Takashi effortlessly crushed the metal arm and tore it away from the man's body. Fear immediately spread across the man's face. Rinko stood frozen in shock after witnessing the scene, while Takashi screamed at the man, ordering him to grit his teeth. Takashi swung his hand and forcefully slapped the soldier across the face, sending several of the man's teeth flying out instantly and leaving everyone around them shocked. Before the soldier could even recover, Takashi struck him with another slap, knocking the man unconscious as blood spilled from the impact. The remaining soldiers immediately became terrified. Even Rinko felt shaken by what she was seeing. That was not the kind of slap she normally associated with Takashi, making her wonder if they truly had been modified after all. The other soldiers stood there dumbfounded for a moment before desperately begging Takashi to spare them, while some of them loudly cried for help. Just as they attempted to escape, Natalie suddenly blocked their path. She grabbed one of the soldiers by the foot and dragged him across the ground while the terrified man begged her to stop. Without hesitation, Natalie swung the soldier through the air and smashed him directly against the wall. The remaining soldiers became horrified by the sight unfolding before them. Natalie then continued relentlessly slamming the soldier against the wall without showing any mercy. The other soldiers could not believe what they were witnessing anymore. Completely overwhelmed by fear, they desperately apologized and begged for forgiveness. Natalie questioned where all the confidence and bravado from earlier had suddenly disappeared to. She casually told them not to cry too much because it was starting to make her feel guilty. Looking at the wall, she pointed out that there were still plenty of white spaces left. She then remarked that if the remaining three worked hard enough, they could probably dye the entire wall a beautiful shade of red. The soldiers huddled together in fear, desperately begging for forgiveness while promising they would return to normal. Takashi finally told Natalie that it was enough. Natalie questioned whether the blood-covered wall really did not bother him. Takashi calmly answered that it did not, because nobody wanted to see a wall painted in blood. Natalie replied that it bothered her instead while continuing to pressure the terrified soldiers. At that moment, military personnel suddenly arrived and ordered everyone not to move. Natalie immediately realized it was the military, while Takashi calmly explained that he had already contacted them before getting into the taxi earlier. The terrified soldiers instantly cried out for help the moment they saw them. One member of the military then approached Takashi and apologized for their inadequate supervision. Takashi coldly remarked that this situation called for disciplinary action and insisted that the men should receive proper punishment. Rinko was still trembling slightly from fear when Takashi turned toward her and asked if she was all right. She quietly answered that she was fine before asking whether the bodies were dead. Takashi explained that there was no problem because machine soldiers possessed extremely high recovery abilities. Takashi then shyly apologized for frightening her. In Rinko's mind, Takashi truly had not changed at all since childhood. He still gave everything he had for the sake of protecting others. The same gentle Takashi remained there. Rinko scolded him, telling him that even if he fought for her sake, There was no way she would respond by acting frightened of him. She refused to insult him like that. Takase smiled after hearing her words and praised Rinko for being just as refreshing as always. Not long after, one soldier approached Takase and addressed him as vice captain. The soldier asked how they should handle the compensation and repair costs from the damage. Takase immediately answered that they would cover the full amount. While the discussion continued in the background, Samaire quietly called out to Rinko and asked whether the boy from earlier was someone she knew. Meanwhile, Takase continued discussing with the military personnel, suggesting that men like those soldiers should spend the rest of their lives restoring battlefields as punishment. Rinko confirmed that it really was Takase and explained that he was her childhood friend. Samaire repeated Takase's name before asking whether that meant he was the same age as Rinko. After realizing he was actually younger, Samaire reacted in surprise. Rinko immediately frowned and firmly stated that she was absolutely not introducing him to her. Samaire curiously asked why while continuing to tease her about it. Rinko reminded her that she was the one who always bragged about refusing to date anyone unless they were handsome, older, and rich. But deep inside her mind, Rinko already knew the real reason. There was no way she could introduce him so casually. After all, Takase was the person she had carried unrequited feelings for during the past 10 years. And for those 10 years, loving Takase had been nothing but an endless chain of obstacles. In Rinko's memories, the very first obstacle was Fumika. Her guard around Takase was unbelievably solid. She stayed attached to him almost 24 hours a day without leaving even the slightest opening, and the look in her eyes was completely insane. Back when they first met, the old Rinko probably would have backed away immediately. But now it was different. She had become jealous herself. She also wanted to keep Takase entirely to herself. Then, once they reached the upper grades of elementary school, another obstacle appeared. The second obstacle was Rinko herself becoming extremely popular with boys. One of the boys eagerly called out to her and offered to carry her backpack. Meanwhile, two other boys behind her whispered among themselves. One admitted that he used to look up to her while also being scared of her, while the other simply commented on how cute she was. Honestly, Rinko found the entire thing nothing but troublesome. She remembered one boy confessing his feelings to her, but instead of feeling happy, she became irritated and yelled at him for calling her out over something so stupid. Afterward, she assumes Takase had already gone home, and she quietly started crying to herself. That particular day happened to be Fumika's piano lesson day, which meant it was one of the rare times Rinko could walk home alone with Takase. However, she soon realized Takase had not gone home at all and had actually stayed behind waiting for her. He casually asked if she had finished her business already, and the moment Rinko saw him still there, she was overwhelmed with happiness. At that same moment, Rinji suddenly appeared. Rinji immediately asked Takase whether he had watched the night baseball game broadcast. Takase greeted him normally, and the two started walking together while Rinko quietly followed behind them. Rinji excitedly talked about how incredible the fielder Kato was, and Takase agreed while mentioning that Kato had already hit 10 home runs since the preseason games while also being excellent at defense. At that moment, Rinko realized the third obstacle had appeared. Takase and Rinji had become close friends. As Rinko watched Takase and Rinji happily talking and playing together, frustration slowly built inside her. She had thought today would finally be a chance to have Takase all to herself. She stared at him while thinking about how unfair it was seeing him smile so happily like that. She wanted him to make that kind of expression for her too. The irritation inside Rinko continued growing. In her mind, Takase already had an unbelievably cute girl like Fumika by his side, yet he still left her behind just to fool around with Rinji. She could not understand it at all. Rinko desperately thought about what she could possibly do to make Takase finally look her way. She could not openly act spoiled and honest like Fumika, and she could not entertain him the same way Rinji could either. As she continued thinking, Rinko searched for some way to make Takase want only her and become completely obsessed with her. Eventually, she came up with an idea. She would become an unattainable flower. Rinko proudly showed her magazine to Takase, and he looked genuinely amazed by it. Rinko confidently replied that this was what happened when she got serious. In her mind, she imagines Takase eventually becoming obsessed with her. She wanted him to realize that the girl standing beside him was a peerless beauty that everyone envied. However, a group of boys suddenly gathered around Rinko and excitedly called out to her. They praised her gravure from that week, while one of them proudly mentioned that he immediately went to buy the magazine. Rinko instantly became irritated and angrily questioned them. She reminded them that they were the same people who used to call her a giant woman before, and now their attitudes had completely changed. She furiously told them to get lost. Takase simply looked at her calmly and reassured her that no matter how famous she became, he would always remain her friend just like he was now. As Takase walked away, Rinko became frustrated once again. What she truly wanted was not for him to stay the same. She wanted Takase himself to change. She desperately wanted the way he looked at her to change immediately. Then middle school arrived, and the moment she heard the news that Takashi had been drafted into the war, Rinko collapsed right on the spot. The pain she felt was overwhelming, as if half of her body had been violently torn away. Deep inside, she became convinced that Takashi probably would never come back alive, and that she would never see him again. She could not even stand properly for a long while afterward. Not long later, she received a message from Fumika. The contents were entirely about Takashi. Fumika explained that she had started learning baseball for his sake, had already submitted their marriage registration, and even learned how to make the Jayuden he liked. As Rinko read through the message, she realized that Fumika had already begun moving forward seriously. Rinko started wondering who Takashi would choose if he actually returned alive. Her rival in love had already gone this far, and Rinko knew she could not afford to lose. She decided that she would become so popular that there would not be a single person left in Japan who did not know her name. If Fumika was going to become the devoted woman waiting for him, then Rinko would become the ultimate unattainable flower. While dreaming about a happy future with Takashi, she continued pushing herself forward all this time. The flashback slowly came to an end. Back in the present, Sumire called out to Rinko while whining that her heart still had not stopped pounding after Takashi saved her earlier. Rinko coldly dismissed it, saying it was only arrhythmia caused by the suspension bridge effect and tension, and that it was absolutely not love. After saying that, she simply walked away from her. In Rinko's mind, she could only think that impossible things were impossible because she herself was already desperate enough. Rinko then called out to Takashi and told him to come over so they could properly continue their reunion. Rinko excitedly shouted for Takashi to jump straight into her chest, declaring that she would hold him tightly. Takashi immediately wrapped his arms around her in a tight embrace while happily announcing that he was finally home. While Rinko immediately complained about how embarrassing the atmosphere was and called him an idiot. As the two embraced each other, Rinko quietly noticed that Takashi's body had become much bigger and warmer than before. At that moment, she firmly decided that she absolutely would not let anyone else have him. While holding on to Takashi, Rinko glanced toward Natalie and Sumire with an intensely competitive look in her eyes. Inside their classroom, an equation had been placed on the board for the students to solve. Once it was completed, the classmates around them reacted in surprise. Their professor openly praised Natalie for answering it correctly. Amano found himself completely drawn toward her again. In his mind, Natalie looked breathtakingly beautiful that day as well, and he strongly wished to keep her locked within his arms someday. Several boys quickly gathered around Natalie afterward, praising how amazing she had been during class, while others commented that it was exactly what they expected from Natalie. Amano quietly observed the scene from a distance. In his mind, he decided that joining that crowd right now would not be a good idea. After all, he was Amano Kyusuke, the man standing at the very top of the social hierarchy. He believed he was different from all those ordinary men flocking around her. He was convinced that with only a few seconds of eye contact, he could easily make Natalie obsessed with him. Later, one of Natalie's classmates invited her to eat lunch together in the courtyard. At that moment, Amano noticed that Natalie had accidentally dropped her handkerchief. In his mind, he immediately thought this was his chance. He even began imagining the perfect way to approach her. He believed that if he failed to seize this opportunity now, another one might never come. However, just as he called out to Natalie, someone suddenly grabbed him from behind. It was Takashi. Takashi casually asked Amano whether he liked baseball, immediately irritating him because Natalie's friend had already picked up the fallen handkerchief and returned it to her. Takashi continued speaking without noticing Amano's frustration, explaining that he had tickets for that night's baseball game and inviting him to go together after school. Takashi enthusiastically explained that the starting pitchers would be the Monster Ushige with an ERA of 1.82 and the AC Wakama with an ERA of 2.12. To Takashi, it was obviously going to become an intense pitching duel, the kind of game baseball fans would absolutely love. Amano coldly rejected the invitation and called Takashi an idiot. However, Takashi casually laughed it off and continued trying to become friends with him, saying that handsome guys like them should get along. Amano immediately told him to go look in a mirror instead. Takashi simply commented that Amano was surprisingly blunt and encouraged him anyway. Amano then questioned why Takashi had suddenly stopped using honorifics toward him and asked whether he was mocking him. Takashi apologized and explained that where he used to live, there was no custom of attaching honorifics to names. Instead of calming Amano down, that explanation only irritated him even more. Amano questioned whether Takashi was trying to pick a fight with him, because from his perspective, an introvert like Takashi casually talking to someone like Amano already felt like a challenge itself. Before leaving, Amano pointed out that Takashi had already transferred into the school more than a week ago yet still had absolutely zero friends. He questioned whether Takashi truly had no value at all. Takashi looked confused after hearing that, but Amano himself remained frustrated. In his mind, the flower of love had been just about to bloom if he had only been allowed to help Natalie earlier. But Takashi, that introverted loser, had ruined the entire moment. Amano silently decided that he would make Takashi understand his proper place. Immediately afterward, he started sending messages in their group chat, asking everyone if they also found it strange seeing Natalie constantly together with Takashi. The girls in the group chat received the messages as well. Amano continued spreading rumors in the group chat, claiming that Takashi was taking advantage of Natalie's weakness and threatening her. He insisted that they needed to save Natalie from Takashi. Amano then instructed everyone to completely ignore Takashi and emphasized that, for Natalie's safety, the entire plan had to remain a secret only between them. In his mind, he smugly thought that Takashi should experience the overwhelming influence of the one standing at the very top of the social caste. Meanwhile, Takashi continued trying to talk to his classmates and invited several of them to go watch the night baseball game together. However, every single one of them ignored him. Takashi became confused after noticing how everyone was avoiding him. The atmosphere around him felt strange, and he could not understand why. He then looked toward another classmate, the only girl he still had not spoken to yet. Ever since the first day he transferred, she had been quietly observing him while pretending to read her book. Takashi started feeling troubled because, despite all his efforts, he still had not managed to make a single friend. Natalie then called out to Takashi and told him they should just go home already. But Takashi genuinely wanted to make new friends that day no matter what. During moments like this, Natalie always ended up helping him. Right then, Natalie's classmates invited her to go to karaoke with them. Natalie immediately insisted that Takashi would come along too. However, the classmates awkwardly fell silent and could not answer her right away. Takashi could instantly feel how uncomfortable the atmosphere had become. The silence around him felt painfully awkward. The kind of youthful school life he had imagined clearly was not something he could obtain that easily. At that moment, Rinko, Fumika, and Rinji suddenly entered their classroom. Rinko immediately approached Takashi and angrily questioned him about the rumors spreading around school. She demanded to know what people meant about him using Natalie's weakness against her and forcing her into becoming his sex slave. The frustration in her voice was obvious. Natalie suddenly jumped into the conversation and casually commented that she would actually accept it, but Takashi immediately smacked her on the head and told her to deny such nonsense instead of encouraging it. Natalie jokingly replied that it had been the perfect chance to push for a common-law marriage instead. Rinji then glanced toward Rinko and Fumika and pointed out that he had already told them from the beginning that the rumors were obviously fake. Takashi then said the timing was perfect and asked Rinji if he wanted to go to the night baseball game together. Rinji immediately agreed, while Natalie also insisted that she wanted to come too. The moment Rinji accepted, both Rinko and Fumika quickly approached him. Rinko demanded that he hand over his ticket and offered to buy it for double or even triple the original price. Fumika immediately raised the offer even further, saying she would pay 5 times the amount instead. Rinji casually replied that he wanted 7 times the price because both of them were acting way too desperate. At that moment, Amano suddenly asked Rinji whether he actually knew Takashi personally. Rinji casually answered that they were not merely acquaintances. Amano immediately smiled as if relieved and started implying that nobody would seriously associate with someone like Takashi anyway. However, Rinji instantly cut him off and firmly declared that Takashi was his best friend and that their relationship was not some cheap connection that could be dismissed so casually. Amano immediately realized how dangerous the situation had become. Takashi's circle included one of the top members of the prefecture's fan club, a super charismatic model, and the girl ranked #1 in popularity among boys because of her gentle cuteness. If people found out Amano had been the one ordering everyone around behind the scenes, it would become a serious problem for him. Meanwhile, Takashi innocently asked his friends whether there was actually something strange about him from their perspective, because no matter what he did, he simply could not make any friends at school. Rinko immediately answered that it was completely fine even if he could not make friends because he already had her. Fumika also reassured him that she would always stay by his side, so he did not need anyone else anyway. Rinji casually told him not to worry about it too much and reminded him that they should just focus on enjoying the night baseball game together instead. Since they still had extra tickets, everyone decided they would all go together. Some of their classmates continued discussing Takashi behind his back. One of the girls asked whether those 3 people were truly Takashi's best friends. Another classmate admitted that the rumors involving Natalie were probably lies, but Amano immediately stepped in before the conversation could end there. Amano confidently claimed that Takashi was actually a schemer. According to him, Takashi was using the influence of those 3 people to make sure Natalie could never oppose him. Amano continued convincing the others that they alone were the only people capable of seeing the truth behind everything. Before long, the group started chanting together that they should thoroughly ignore Takashi for Natalie's sake. As Amano walked away afterward, he thought about how unforgivable it was for Takashi to deceive those 3 people. At the same time, he felt grateful that they were all so simple-minded. Later that night, everyone headed to the baseball game together. Takashi looked around the stadium and immediately thought that the atmosphere really was amazing after all. The excitement around the stadium completely matched what he had imagined. Takashi then handed something over to Natalie, leaving her curious about what it was. He explained that it was a cheering uniform meant to be worn while supporting the team. He had even bought matching ones for everyone so they could all wear them together. Rinji jokingly commented that Takashi was acting just like a child. A little later, Natalie called out to Takashi again. When he asked what was wrong, both Rinko and Fumika immediately turned their attention toward them. Natalie explained that she could not properly put on the cheering shirt by herself, so Takashi casually started helping her while complaining that Natalie really made people do work for her every chance she got. The moment Rinko and Fumika saw that, both of them became visibly shocked. Fumika quickly approached them and insisted that she would help Natalie instead while telling Takashi to step away. However, Rinko immediately joined in too, claiming that she also could not properly put the shirt on and asking Takashi to help her as well. Takashi looked confused and questioned whether putting on the shirt was really that difficult. Rinko instantly became irritated and ordered him to sit next to her instead, even offering him her drink afterward as thanks. Fumika immediately raised her voice and protested that Takashi was supposed to sit beside her. She even pointed out that indirect kisses were absolutely unacceptable. Natalie then complained that both of them were being unfair because she had originally gotten Takashi's attention first, and cutting in line should not be allowed. Meanwhile, Takashi simply laughed at the entire scene and casually commented to Rinji that everyone was unbelievably excited, exactly what he expected from professional baseball fans. Rinji calmly replied that Takashi really remained carefree no matter the situation. At the same time, both Rinko and Fumika silently thought about the same thing. They had already spent 3 years suffering through despair while waiting for Takashi. No matter how much Natalie might have become Takashi's comrade through war, neither of them intended to give up. As the game finally started, Takashi and Rinji quickly became absorbed in it. Takashi reacted loudly to a close ball call during a full count, while Rinji immediately commented that the batter had completely read the vertical slider. Natalie quietly admitted that she had absolutely no idea what the two of them were talking about. Hearing that, Fumika immediately realized this was her opportunity. Since Natalie knew nothing about baseball, this was the perfect chance for Fumika to keep her in check. Fumika then explained that watching the game itself was not the only enjoyable part of baseball. The famous gourmet food sold around the stadium was also one of the biggest attractions. Takashi immediately praised her knowledge. Soon afterward, everyone happily started enjoying the food together, and even Natalie admitted that it tasted delicious. Fumika proudly pointed out that the beef bowl there happened to be Takashi's favorite. After all, Fumika knew practically everything about Takashi's preferences. She had even memorized professional baseball strategies, complicated baseball terminology, and every player's annual salary. That was exactly why she believed she was the one truly fighting to become Takashi's legal wife. During the game, Rinko loudly cheered for the players and shouted for them to hit the ball out of the park. Takashi looked surprised and pointed out how fired up she had become. Rinko then turned toward Natalie and explained that making a huge commotion together was one of the fun parts of watching baseball games. She pointed out the loud cheering songs and the excitement filling the stadium, asking Natalie if it did not make her excited too. Rinko proudly added that she had already caused all kinds of commotion together with Takashi many times before. The two of them had gone to many different places together over the years. Compared to Natalie, the amount of time she had spent beside Takashi was completely different. That was exactly why she believed she was the one most suited to become Takashi's legal wife. Natalie accepted Rinko's suggestion enthusiastically and declared that she would start making a commotion too. Watching the scene, Takashi lightly bumped into them and commented that thanks to Fumika and Rinko, Natalie really seemed to be having fun too. Fumika then handed Natalie a drink, explaining that it happened to be Takashi's favorite. At the same time, Rinko handed Natalie the lyrics sheet for Takashi's favorite cheering song and invited her to sing along as well. Natalie happily accepted both of them and sincerely commented that they were all very kind to her, making her genuinely happy. Afterward, everyone continued watching the game together while enjoying the lively atmosphere. Later that night, once Takashi returned home, he greeted Karen by announcing that he was back. However, Sherry immediately became upset and complained about how late he was, demanding to know where he had been wandering around all this time. Takashi casually explained that they had gone to watch a night baseball game, but Karen still remained irritated and complained that she had been stuck doing nothing but drills during the entire time he was out. Takashi apologized and tried calming her down by revealing that he had brought back takoyaki for her, asking her to forgive him because of it. Sherry stared at the food in confusion because she could not understand why it was called takoyaki when she could not even see any octopus. Even so, she gathered her courage and carefully tried eating it for the first time. The moment she tasted it, she became genuinely amazed by how delicious it was. Takasi then invited her to come along with them next time once her transfer exams were finished. Sherry confidently replied that the exams would be easy for her anyway. Takasi then asked where Karen had gone. Sherry explained that Takasi's father and mother had called her away because they were currently having some kind of discussion involving a video from the bathroom. A little later, Takasi checked the message he had received and saw that Fumika had sent him a photo they took together during the baseball game. Takasi quietly smiled after seeing it. The bond they all shared together was not something built overnight either. Thinking about that, Takasi decided that he would continue doing his best to make friends again tomorrow. Meanwhile, on the top floor of a tall building, the same girl who had been quietly reading at school earlier sat alone once again with a book in her hands. Her name was Tomo. At that moment, one of her servants approached her and informed her that the investigation report she had requested had finally been prepared. As Tomo spread all of the documents across the table, a strange smile slowly formed on her face, followed by a quiet chuckle. She gently pointed toward Takasi's photograph and became convinced that her instincts had been correct all along. Her eyes had not been mistaken about him. Tomo then lustfully licked Takasi's image while even drooling over it slightly, completely unable to hide her anticipation for tomorrow. In her mind, she referred to Takasi as the arrival point, humanity's final destination. Takasi and Natalie were about to leave for school when Sherry mentioned that she wanted to go to school as well. Curious, she asked what kind of place the school was. Takasi happily explained that it was a fun place where they sat in chairs and listened to the teacher's lessons. To him, it made them realize that they had finally returned to their everyday lives. Sherry thought it sounded nice, but Natalie pointed out that everyone had been avoiding Takasi. They had even left him out of karaoke, causing Sherry to wonder if he was being excluded. Takasi reasoned that yesterday had simply been an unlucky day, making Natalie laugh as she remarked that it wasn't a wedding, so such things didn't apply. Sherry worried about whether Takasi would be alright, but he reassured her that she would be fine and reminded her that he had a special plan prepared. Just then, Fumika arrived and apologized for making them wait. After that, they headed out while Sherry saw them off and wished them a good day. On the way to school, Takasi refused to let the high school life he had dreamed of end like that. He was determined to make friends that day. When they entered their classroom, their classmates had been chatting among themselves, but everyone immediately turned to look at them. Despite that, every one of them continued to ignore Takasi. In his mind, there was only one way to break the freezing atmosphere. He grabbed Natalie like a hostage and demanded that everyone become his friend, asking whether they really did not care about what would happen to their cute Natalie. Natalie wondered what he was doing, and Takasi explained that it was the strategy he had once used to become friends with Rinko. Since there had already been a successful example, he believed everything would work out. Natalie questioned what kind of method that was for making friends and left him behind, saying that she was not taking part in it. Confused, Takasi asked where she was going, and Natalie replied that she was heading to the restroom before telling him to do his best. Takasi grew frustrated with himself, while Amano quietly whispered to their classmates and pointed out that things were exactly as expected. Soon, their classmates started gossiping, convinced that Takasi was trouble and deciding to keep their distance from him. Takasi found himself completely alone, as though lying on a bed of nails. This was not how he had imagined his youth would turn out. While walking around, he suddenly heard someone greet him with a good morning. Turning around, he discovered that it was a girl. She explained that she simply wanted to talk to him for a bit and asked whether he had some time. Overjoyed, Takasi eagerly agreed and became excited at the thought that the girl might finally become his friend. When she asked if she could ask him anything, he readily accepted. The girl then began asking about the 3 years before his transfer to that school. Takasi explained that there was nothing special about it, saying that he had simply lived overseas and did not have any particularly interesting stories. However, the girl revealed that she was interested in hearing stories about living overseas during the war. Even so, Takasi could only apologize, explaining that he did not have any interesting episodes to share. The girl insisted on talking about St. Petersburg instead and confirmed whether Takasi was familiar with it. St. Petersburg was the city where Takasi had last been stationed. However, he claimed that he was not familiar with it and wondered if she had mistaken him for someone else. The girl remained unconvinced and revealed that there was no mistake, referring to him as Arrival Point San. Takasi immediately became serious. The girl clearly knew about his background, and she knew it in remarkable detail. She tried to calm him down and explained that she only wanted to talk. Meanwhile, their classmates began whispering among themselves. One of them wondered where St. Petersburg was, while another thought that it was somewhere in Russia. Takasi let out a sigh, and the girl moved closer, asking what he wanted to talk about. In response, Takasi urged her not to say anything unnecessary in front of everyone. The girl agreed and suggested changing locations since they had already attracted more attention than necessary. At that moment, the homeroom teacher arrived and announced the start of class, causing both of them to turn toward her. Takasi told the girl to sit in her seat because Minami would become angry otherwise. The The girl appeared confused by that and immediately called out to their teacher, asking whether she was really planning to scold her. Caught off guard, the teacher quickly denied it. The girl then pointed out that Takashi had claimed that the teacher would be angry, but the teacher insisted that Takashi was simply making things up on his own. She even scolded him for making strange accusations. After hearing that, the girl confirmed that she would leave her seat after class and wanted to know whether there would be any problem with that. Although visibly nervous, the teacher immediately assured her that there would be no problem at all and declared that the rest could be left to her. The girl was known as Hibari-sama, and she invited Takashi to come with her. Even then, Takashi remained confused about who she actually was. As they left, Amano concluded that everything was over for Takashi because nobody in the school could oppose Hibari. Eventually, they arrived at a quiet room, which turned out to be the audiovisual room. Since they were there, their conversation would not be like the one outside. However, the moment Takashi stepped inside, he was stunned. The room was filled with men dressed in suits, and Hibari instructed him to take a seat. Every one of the men wore serious expressions, and they were all carrying guns. Takashi realized that coming there had been a mistake, but after letting out a sigh, he sat down anyway. He then asked what it was that Hibari wanted to discuss. Hibari remarked that he had become rather cold and suggested that he should smile more often. Takashi replied that if that was what she thought, then so be it. In response, Hibari asked him to help her live a normal life. Confused by those words, Takashi could only wonder what she was talking about. Hibari suddenly became loud and began passionately praising Takashi, declaring that he was the hero who had saved the world. In her eyes, he had accomplished incredible achievements, yet he intended to hide them and quietly live out his life. She believed that someone like him deserved far more recognition. To her, it made no sense. If Takashi had not been present during the Wangan Strait defense battle, humanity would have been wiped out. She continued complaining about how unreasonable it was to leave such a veteran hero alone and questioned what the country was doing. Takashi explained that things were like that because he had personally asked everyone not to get involved with him after his return. However, Hibari argued that the fact that the country was not getting involved at all meant something else. Listening to her, Takashi thought that she was a girl with very intense ups and downs in her emotions. Then, all of a sudden, she stopped talking. Curious, he asked what had happened. Hibari looked at him with shining eyes and revealed that the moment she first saw him, she had experienced a shock like being struck by lightning. She had met many people before, but it was the first time she had ever felt something like that. Takashi nervously accepted her words. Because of that, Hibari had immediately begun investigating him through her royal guards. She explained that she had been especially shocked by the existence of the special biosoldiers created through DoD. The thought that he had incorporated debris cells into himself in order to defeat the debris had left a strong impression on her. Takashi was stunned and immediately wondered if Hibari had some connection to the military, but she denied it. He then asked how she even knew about DoD, because it was not the kind of information that someone could simply look up whenever they wanted. According to Hibari, the answer was simple. It was because she belonged to the Hibari family. She explained that the Hibari family was one of the 3 great families of Japan. Even among those 3 great families, they possessed overwhelming financial power and had influenced the country itself. They were also the only family in the nation allowed to maintain a private armed force known as Nirvana's Judgment. Confused, Takashi turned to one of the guards and asked whether they were members of Nirvana's Judgment and whether there was some kind of origin behind the name. One of the guards answered and revealed that Oju had simply come up with the name herself. Upon hearing that, Hibari immediately warns Takashi not to speak to her bodyguards without permission. Takashi took out his phone and searched for the meaning of the name. According to what he read, Nirvana referred to a state where worldly desires were extinguished and peace of mind was attained. Armed soldiers who passed judgment while in such a state sounded rather cool to him. Hearing that, Hibari revealed that she had thought of several other names as well, such as Twilight Crusaders and Soaring Heat Haze. In Takashi's mind, it became clear that Hibari was simply a famous young lady. Since she did not appear to have any hostility toward him, he decided to answer carefully and let things pass without causing trouble. Suddenly, Hibari moved closer and held his face with both hands. Looking straight at him, she declared that he was exactly the person she had been searching for. With both hands still on his face, she insisted that he was perfect. To her, he was a man like a hero from a fairy tale. She then announced that she would take him to her home right away. Takashi could feel himself sweating as Hibari continued explaining that she wanted to introduce him to her father and mother. In her mind, Takashi already belonged to her because he was destined to become her groom. Nervously, Takashi admitted that he could not keep up with the conversation. However, Hibari continued insisting that he was already a member of the Hibari family and therefore had to carry himself with dignity. Takashi wondered whether she was even listening to him, but Hibari instead expressed that she wanted him to call her Tomo, since she intended to call him Takashi as well. She tightly embraced him and excitedly insisted that they should head to the government office immediately and register their marriage. There were still many things that had to be done that day, so they needed to move quickly. After apologizing, Takashi gently broke free from the hug and asked Hibari to look for someone else, because he could not marry her. The moment those words reached her ears, Hibari's expression changed completely. The smile on her face disappeared, and she questioned what he had just said because she had not heard him clearly. She demanded that he repeat the words once more and make them absolutely clear. Takashi raised his voice in return. After apologizing, he clearly repeated that she should look elsewhere because he could not marry her. Hearing those words spoken so directly left Hibari stunned. She had not expected him to actually repeat them so clearly. Soon after, her anger rose, and she loudly reminded him that she was Hibari Tomo, the eldest daughter of the Hibari family. Unable to accept his refusal, she became furious at the thought that he would not obey her wishes and passionately declared that she intended to marry Takashi, demanding that he marry her. Takashi looked at Tomo and gradually calmed himself down. He expressed that he was grateful for her feelings before apologizing to her. In response, Tomo stared at him and wondered whether there was another woman in his life. Takashi answered by mentioning Natalie and Sherry. The two of them faced each other, and Tomo admitted that she was the jealous type. She explained that if he was willing to say such things so clearly, then she would become fiercely jealous. According to her, it would be enough to make her want them dead. She went on to explain that her royal guards were first-rate assassins. The moment she gave an order, they would act without hesitation. Because of that, she asked Takashi if he was truly certain about his choice. If she was not the one he chose, then the people he cared about might lose their lives. Despite those words, Takashi calmly stated that such a thing was impossible. Instead, he believed that the situation would simply be turned against Tomo. However, she confidently replied that her forces were a special unit representing Japan. Even if Natalie and the others had been modified, they were still ordinary people in her eyes. There was no way they could defeat trained professionals. At that moment, Takashi realized that Tomo still knew nothing about their true abilities. He understood that mere words would probably never convince her. At the same time, it would become troublesome if her people actually launched an attack. He absolutely wanted to avoid a situation where Natalie and the others would accidentally be pushed into action. Takashi then stood up and headed toward the door. Seeing this, Tomo immediately questioned where he was going, reminding him that their conversation was not over yet. She also wondered why he had locked the door and became curious about what he intended to do. Takashi explained that when it came to pure combat ability, Natalie and Sherry were actually stronger than he was. Therefore, if Tomo truly wished to kill them, she would first need to be capable of killing him. As those words settled in, the atmosphere inside the room changed. With a serious expression, Takashi informed Tomo that he would show her exactly what that meant. All of Tomo's royal guards immediately pointed all of their guns at Takashi, while Tomo warned him not to move. She made it clear that if he came any closer, she would shoot. Takashi simply closed his eyes and gave a command within his mind, wishing for them to stop and needing them to stop. He questioned whether they could stop for him. Then, Takashi suddenly ordered them to drop their weapons, and every gun instantly fell to the floor. Everyone was left stunned as they stared at the weapons lying on the ground. Tomo angrily scolded the guards, questioning what they were doing. However, even the guards themselves were confused. Takashi picked up one of the guns and spoke again, ordering them not to move. The royal guards completely froze in place, while Tomo continued to scold them, wondering what they had been doing all this time. One of the guards revealed that his body was no longer listening to him at all. Takashi then gave another order, asking whether they could tell him how to use the gun. One of them answered, explaining that he needed to pull the slide, load it, pull the trigger, and fire. Takashi pulled the slide and asked if he had done it correctly. The guard confirmed it and instructed him again to pull the triggers so that the bullet would come out. The guard himself could not understand why his mouth was moving on its own and had no idea what was happening. Tomo was stunned. Horror filled her eyes as she looked at Takashi, wondering what exactly he had done. Takashi explained that there were 26 types of debris cells, from A to Z, and that each one possessed its own characteristics. The ability he had just used was the L-type, known as Luca. It was capable of forcing simple commands for a short period of time, leaving Tomo completely shocked. Takashi then instructed her to kill Natalie and Sherry. He ordered her to repeat those words after killing him, and then he placed the gun inside his own mouth. He pulled the trigger, causing Tomo to freeze in shock before collapsing onto her knees. After shooting himself, Takashi spat the bullets out onto the floor in front of her. Tomo no longer knew what she should do. Takashi asked if she understood what he was trying to say, because even with something like that, she still could not kill him. He asked her once more how she felt now, and whether she still intended to attack Natalie and the others after witnessing everything. He concluded that she did not. Tomo began to cry. That reaction hurt Takashi the most. It once again made him realize that he was a monster. As he prepared to leave the room, Tomo suddenly asked whether he really liked Natalie that much. Takasi admitted that he liked her, at least he thought so. He explained that without them, he never would have made it back alive. Natalie and Sherry had saved his life 4 or 5 times, and the only reason he was able to see his family again and reunite with his friends was because of them. Everything he had now was thanks to Natalie and Sherry. Because of that, as long as they wished to remain by his side, Takasi wanted to keep living for them, because they had become like family to him. Takasi was walking along, thinking that if he put enough distance between them, Tomo would not do anything foolish. In fact, he believed that she would never get involved again and probably would not even speak to him anymore. Later, while sitting in one of the spots around their school, Natalie suddenly appeared and immediately sensed that he had used Luca. As always, her sensing ability was remarkable, and Takasi simply admitted that she was right. Natalie asked if he had used it on the woman who had called him out and wondered what kind of situation could have forced him to use Luca. She even suspected that he had nearly been killed, but Takasi denied it. Natalie became upset because she thought that Tomo had been looking down on her. She had no intention of forgiving such a thing and wanted to deal with Tomo herself, but Takasi gently patted her head. He explained that it was actually the opposite, and that Tomo had passionately proposed to him. In his mind, he thought that being a popular guy was difficult. Natalie sincerely asked if that was really all that happened, wondering why Luca had been necessary when there had even been a gunshot. Takasi simply laughed and claimed that it was all just her imagination. He explained that he had told Tomo that he already had a wife named Natalie, so it was impossible and that was all there was to it. He reassured her and told her not to worry. Natalie was about to get angry, but instead she started blushing. Takasi thought it had been easy and that things had worked out well. As the two of them laughed together, someone suddenly called out to him. It was Tomo. She apologized and asked for a moment of his time. Then she embraced Takasi and expressed how incredible the earlier experience had been, saying that it had been her first time. She found it amazing and wanted to learn more deeply about Takasi. Natalie immediately questioned what he had done to the woman, and Takasi casually explained that it was the same Russian roulette with only bullets that Sherry used to do. Natalie became furious and warned Tomo not to mess with Takasi because she would erase her. However, Tomo remained persistent and continued wanting him to show her more of the powers of the special biosoldier. The ordinary daily life that Takasi had imagined slipped away from him once again. Back in the classroom, Tomo called out to Takasi, leaving everyone around them shocked. Takasi noticed that Tomo seemed to be quite admired by their classmates. She was seen as a cool, beautiful, and intelligent young lady. So when she returned acting like a complete mess around him, the accusing stares directed at Takasi hurt him deeply. Tomo clung tightly to him, and Takasi quietly thought to himself that his dream of making 100 friends had already been ruined. All he had wanted was to peacefully eat his onigiri. Tomo tried to comfort him, saying that it was fine and mentioning that the lyrics were about one person being left out. Natalie immediately agreed, saying that it was exactly like the lyrics. Tomo then explained that friendship was about quality rather than quantity and even claimed that she alone was worth 100 people. Then another voice suddenly joined in, claiming that she was there too. When everyone turned around, they discovered that it was Sherry. At that moment, Takasi suddenly spotted Sherry and could not help but wonder why she was at school. Sherry happily revealed that she had transferred into the school, leaving Takasi wondering how she had managed to do it. Sherry casually explained that she had bribed the teachers. According to her, it was not a backdoor entry, but a flying entry. Hearing that immediately gave Takasi a headache, and he quickly asked where she had gotten that kind of money. Sherry explained that she had received a deposit from the Director General that very morning, so she simply arranged everything from there. She repeatedly reminded him to treat money carefully because money was what made the world go round. Takasi could only respond indifferently before noticing something else and asking whether her uniform size was wrong. Sherry casually explained that she had borrowed one from Natalie, and Natalie immediately laughed while teasing Sherry about having a tiny chest. For some reason, Takasi felt an even stronger sense of hatred around him. The boys around them were glaring at him with fury because he was constantly surrounded by beautiful girls, something they found unforgivable. However, from Takasi's point of view, it was simply force majeure. Later, in the schoolyard, Takasi attended his first physical education class since transferring in. It seemed that the transfer students would be measured individually. He became curious when he noticed Tomo there, since the activity was supposed to be for transfer students only. Tomo casually explained that it was because she belonged to the Hibari family. She then became curious herself and asked whether Natalie and Sherry also possessed special abilities. Natalie admitted that they did, but explained that her own ability was rather specialized, so she rarely used it in daily life. It was too dangerous to use recklessly. Tomo was fascinated by such stories and eagerly wanted to hear more details. Natalie found it surprising because Tomo was the first person who listened to those kinds of stories with genuine happiness. Takasi began to think that they might actually become good friends. Even after learning about their backgrounds, Tomo was still trying to become involved with them. At that moment, their instructor called everyone over because they were about to measure the 50-meter dash. Sherry became curious about the best times, and their instructor explained that the standard time for girls was 7.7 seconds, while for boys it was 6.6 seconds. The instructor then informed Tomo that it was time for her table tennis class, but she casually brushed it aside and said not to worry about it. While the three girls continued discussing the race, Natalie wondered if running it in about 5 seconds would be enough. However, Takashi thought that such a result would practically be a world record, and that around 7.5 seconds would be more reasonable. Takashi remembered the oath that he, Natalie, and Sherry had made. They had sworn that they would definitely survive and become happier than anyone else. Looking back, they had barely managed to preserve their humanity on that hellish battlefield. Because of that promise, everything they had endured carried meaning. Now that they had finally returned, Takashi had no intention of compromising. As he prepared to run, Takashi lowered himself into position while Natalie stood nearby, coaching him. Then he burst forward. In his mind, he reminded himself to hold back with all his strength. If he truly ran at full speed, covering 50 meters in less than a second would be easy for him. Even if he won by an overwhelming margin, all it would do was make everyone see him as a monster, and there would be no point in that. After crossing the finish line, their professor was amazed by the result. Takashi had finished the 50-meter dash in 6.3 seconds. He felt satisfied with himself because he had managed to do it. Achieving a perfectly balanced record like that was the shortest path toward his dream of becoming a high taxpayer. When it was Natalie and Sherry's turn, both of them recorded 7.5 seconds, and they remarked that it was fast. Natalie considered it an easy victory, and the two of them looked pleased with the result. Takashi praised them, pointing out that they had achieved exactly the time they had aimed for and calling them amazing. Sherry happily asked to be praised even more. However, Tomo suddenly burst out in frustration. She could not understand what they were doing and complained that this was not what she had wanted to see. She wanted them to be more arrogant and questioned why they were holding back so much. The three of them simply ignored her because their professor called them over for the next event, which was the sidestep test. As Tomo watched them participate, she continued shouting and telling them to take it seriously. Takashi argued that they were already giving it their best effort, but Tomo insisted that they stop pretending and act more proudly for her sake. Eventually, she even began crying, causing Takashi to tell her to stop because she would only create another strange misunderstanding. Even though he was already disliked enough, he did not need another problem. Natalie noticed his situation and comforted him, telling him that he did not really need to get along with people like that. She had heard the rumors and believed that it was true that he was being left out. Takashi reasoned that it was probably just a misunderstanding, but Natalie pointed out that their classmates were simply being carried away by rumors and saying whatever they wanted. If it had only happened once or twice, she could have dismissed it as a joke, but it had been going on for the entire week. Natalie started getting irritated and thought the whole situation was seriously awful. In her anger, she accidentally broke the machine she was holding. Tomo was amazed by the sight, while Takashi panicked. Natalie wondered what she should do since the machine had already displayed the highest score. Takashi suggested that she should just smash the screen. Tomo excitedly praised them again and wanted them to proudly announce their achievement and act arrogantly about it. Takashi could only beg her to please stay quiet. Somehow, Takashi managed to cover everything up and eventually headed toward the boys' locker room. The moment he entered, he noticed that everyone inside was staring at him. He felt more targeted than usual. Soon, Amano approached him and asked for a moment of his time. Takashi calmly asked what it was about, but before Amano could continue, Shimura suddenly exploded in anger. He accused Takashi of pretending not to understand, called him a bastard, and even threatened to kill him. Amano quickly tried to calm Shimura down before asking Takashi if he had said anything to Natalie and the others. Confused, Takashi asked what he meant by that. Amano explained that perhaps he had told them not to get involved with the others or to ignore them even if they tried talking to them. Takashi immediately denied it, but Shimura burst out once again, blaming him for saying something unnecessary that had changed the girls' attitudes. In response, Takashi teased Shimura by saying that constantly yelling would never make him popular. That only made Shimura angrier, but Amano stepped in and told everyone to leave the matter to him. Amano explained that even the girls themselves were being ignored. Takashi suggested that maybe they were simply in a bad mood. However, Amano pointed out that the girls still talked to Takashi normally, and after thinking about it, Takashi admitted that it was true. Amano was just about to ask how they could become closer to Natalie when Takashi suddenly removed his shirt, revealing his body. Every boy in the room was stunned, and one of them even wondered how much training was required to build a body like that. Shibasaki Takashi truly was a man of unfathomable depths. At their school, Karen apologized to Sumire for making her come along. Sumire did not mind at all and assured her that if it was Karen's request, she would gladly tag along anytime. The two of them had been friends ever since entering the school together. Sumire worked as a model at the same agency as Rinko, and her cheerful personality had helped Karen many times. She had comforted her when Takashi was drafted and she was feeling depressed, and she had also protected her from Owagami. Sumire possessed a strong sense of justice and was truly a dependable and cool girl. After hearing the whole story from Karen, Sumire immediately exploded in anger at how terrible it was. She became furious over the baseless rumors being spread and loudly declared that she would give those responsible a piece of her mind. Soon, she was already shouting in the hallway about how Karen's little brother was supposedly turning beautiful girls into sex slaves. Karen hurriedly stopped her because she was being far too loud. She also reminded Sumire that Takashi's return from the war was supposed to remain a secret. Sumire questioned why they had to hide it, and Karen explained that Takashi simply did not want to attract negative attention. Sumire pointed out that Takashi was already standing out in a bad way, and Karen had no choice but to agree. Still, if Karen wanted her to stay quiet, then she would respect that. Instead, she would simply warn the others as an older student. Karen thanked her for understanding. Since Sumire liked handsome men, Karen briefly considered introducing Renji to her someday. However, she quickly decided it probably would not work because Renji was younger. Sumire would likely refuse anyone who was not older and rich. But precisely because Sumire cared so much about appearance, Karen felt safe letting her get close to Takashi. The two eventually arrived at the room, and the moment Sumire saw him, she became completely captivated. Karen introduced her little brother, who was inside the room, and Sumire's eyes immediately sparkled with admiration as she stared at Takashi. Karen called out to her, but instead of responding normally, Sumire suddenly hugged Karen and became excited over the fact that she was Takashi's older sister. She found the coincidence unbelievable and was overwhelmed by surprise. In her eyes, reuniting with Takashi in such a way felt like destiny itself, as though they were connected by the red thread of fate. Karen could only stare in confusion, especially since Sumire had completely abandoned her usual first-person pronoun. However, Sumire continued excitedly, convinced that no matter how cruel Rinko's group might be, they would never be able to sever the bond between herself and Takashi. Karen was left wondering where Sumire's usual manner of speaking had disappeared to. Soon after, Sumire happily turned back to her and eagerly asked to be introduced properly to her brother. She hoped that Karen would tell Takashi that she was actually a pure and innocent girl, and she also wished to exchange contact information with him. Karen coldly rejected the idea and declared that it was absolutely impossible. She had no intention of introducing him. She was already preparing to leave because she needed to clear up the bad rumors surrounding Takashi and had no time for such things. Sumire quickly stopped her and tried to persuade her to spare just a little time, but Karen remained firm. She had no intention of waiting, nor did she plan to spare any time at all. Sumire desperately begged Karen, and her voice was loud enough for almost everyone nearby to hear. Karen reacted angrily and told her to stop calling her Wanichan because it gave her goosebumps. From the classroom door, Takashi noticed the commotion and called out to Karen. He asked what she was doing there and why they were causing such a racket. He told both of them to calm down because they were attracting far too much attention. As expected, their classmates immediately began gossiping again. One of the girls quietly remarked that there was yet another person connected to him, and this time it was another beautiful girl. One of the boys wondered if she was also being blackmailed. Another girl approached Amano and insisted that they had to save those girls quickly. Amano could only stare in surprise. Sumire immediately poured out her complaints to Takashi, insisting that everything had become a mess because Karen was being mean. Karen quickly argued that the problem was that Sumire kept saying ridiculous things. Sumire started crying and insisted that she was not joking and that she was completely serious. That only made Karen angrier, and she snapped in frustration because Sumire was still talking about it. Takashi calmed Karen down and asked why she had come all the way to the first-year classroom when the second-year classrooms were in a completely different building. Karen was about to explain, but Sumire interrupted and declared that she had come specifically to see Takashi. Then she grabbed his hand. The moment Takashi looked at her, he recognized her as the girl from Rinko's agency. Remembering that she had once told him how badly she wanted to see him made Sumire blush even more. She then took his hand and pressed it against her chest, claiming that it was proof that her heart was beating rapidly. Takashi nervously admitted that he did not know what to do, but Sumire urged him to open his hand and squeeze harder. Seeing such a scene immediately enraged Karen. She shouted at Sumire and demanded to know what she thought she was doing with her little brother. She scolded her friend and questioned what kind of person would try to seduce her friend's younger brother right in front of his own sister. Sumire casually brushed it off, claiming that it was only a little fan service. Soon, the other girls joined in as well. Natalie made the first move and wanted to participate, followed by Sherry, and even Tomo joined them. In the end, all of them collapsed onto the floor together. Watching the chaos unfold, one of their classmates urged Amano that they had to save them. However, Amano could only ask which one exactly needed saving. Meanwhile, inside an office, someone reported that the four of them had headed to Japan. The Director General received the report, while a soldier confirmed that they had attempted to stop them but had been completely outmatched. The Director General calmly stated that it could not be helped. If those four truly became serious, then nobody would be capable of stopping them. Elsewhere, inside a cafe restaurant, a man with long hair entered the establishment. The waiters greeted him, only to become stunned by his appearance. The man casually remarked that it seemed his companions had already arrived and politely asked the waiters to help him locate them. The staff immediately agreed. As he walked through the restaurant, many customers turned their heads and stared at him. Some were amazed by how cool they looked and wondered whether they were supermodels. Eventually, the man stopped in front of a table and apologized for making them wait. There, he greeted the young boy Hiryu and the Carson sisters, who looked so alike that they could easily be mistaken for twins. After waiting for a while, all of them stood up. The long-haired man greeted the others and asked whether they should begin and if everyone was ready. Hiryu answered that he was ready and had simply been waiting for Portman. He had already made up his mind. The Carson sisters also confirmed that they were prepared. Emily, one of the sisters, likewise stated that they were ready. With everyone present, Portman declared that it was time to bring back the endpoint and the turning point. Back at school, classes had finally ended, and Takasi felt relieved that the day was over. The girls around him looked concerned, and Natalie noticed that he seemed exhausted. Sherry also pointed out that he looked gloomy. Takasi told them that they themselves were part of the reason and asked them not to say things like that. As they walked outside, someone suddenly called out to Takasi. It was Fumika and Rinko. The two approached him, and Rinko asked whether he had any plans for the weekend. Takasi replied that he did not have anything in particular scheduled. Hearing that, the two happily revealed that they were planning to buy swimsuits. Fumika pointed out that Takasi had grown taller, so his old size no longer fit. Takasi agreed, though he wondered why they were talking about swimsuits. Rinko explained that they were planning to go to the beach during summer vacation. Fumika then asked whether he liked the beach, and Takasi admitted that he did. At that moment, Natalie called out to Fumika after hearing about the beach trip. She eagerly asked if she could come along as well. Soon after, Sherry and Tomo also expressed their desire to join them. Fumika and Rinko fell silent. In Rinko's mind, she worried that if Natalie and the others joined them, their plan to appeal to Takasi with swimsuits would become much more difficult. Even so, she believed that it was the right thing to do, and she had no intention of losing. In the end, Rinko decided that if they were all going together, then everyone would simply go together. Fumika was left surprised by the sudden turn of events. Shortly afterward, Sherry and Tomo introduced themselves to Fumika and Rinko. Watching all of them laugh together brought a smile to Takasi's face. Seeing everyone getting along gave him peace of mind, and he felt glad that he had risked his life to fight. Even though he still had not completely fit in with his classmates, the ordinary high school life he had always wanted was right in front of him. Then, a voice suddenly echoed inside his mind, calling his name. Takasi immediately became tense. He recognized the phenomenon as Tina. It also seemed that Natalie and Sherry could not hear the voice. Wondering who it belonged to, he listened as it spoke again. The mysterious voice informed Takasi that there was something extremely important it needed to discuss with him. It then asked whether he could come to the location it was about to reveal, bringing only Natalie and Sherry with him, with just the three of them together. The voice inside Takasi's mind asked him to come to the place it was about to reveal, bringing only Natalie and Sherry with him. The voice sounded familiar, belonging to a man, yet Takasi could not immediately remember who it was. Inside his mind, he asked for the person's identity and demanded that he state his model and name. Portman was surprised that Takasi had already forgotten his voice, finding it rather sad. Hearing that refreshing voice mixed with its usual sticky tone immediately brought one man to Takasi's mind. It had only been 2 months since he had left the military, so it had not been that long. Still, hearing the voice of an old comrade after some time made him feel a little happy. Takasi explained that Portman had spoken to him in Japanese, which was why he had failed to recognize him. He told Portman to speak in English instead and even called him an idiot. Portman responded that it was quite harsh, especially after he had worked so hard to learn the language. Takasi smiled as memories from the past came back to him. He greeted Portman and asked how he had been doing. Later, Takasi, Natalie, and Sherry headed to a military training area marked with signs prohibiting entry. Natalie remarked that she had no idea such a training facility existed nearby. Takasi admitted that he did not know either, since he had been sent overseas immediately after being drafted. When they entered the area, Takasi noticed that nobody was around. It appeared that the place had been completely cleared out. At the same time, he felt that Portman somehow seemed different from usual. He lacked his usual energy, and Takasi had no idea what Portman wanted to discuss. Natalie asked whether Portman had really instructed him to bring them along. Takasi confirmed that Portman had specifically told him to bring both Natalie and Sherry. Hearing that, Sherry seemed puzzled. Takasi noticed her serious expression and asked what was wrong. Sherry wondered whether Portman was afraid of Natalie and treated her like a psychopath. She found it strange that someone who had constantly avoided Natalie in the past now wanted to talk to her. However, Takasi refused to believe that Portman could possibly be scared of Natalie. In his mind, there was simply no way. Chuckling, Takasi explained that Portman was actually a fearless man who had invited Natalie at the end of the war and even asked her to live together with him. There was no way such a person could be afraid of her. However, Sherry argued that aside from them, nobody else would be foolish enough to invite the crazy Natalie to live together. Natalie protested and reminded Sherry that she was also a young maiden, asking her not to go too far. Rather than focusing on being invited, Natalie recalled that Portman had indeed asked her something similar and wanted her to remain in the military. However, she had already decided that she would stay with Takasi forever, so she rejected the idea and made it clear that she had no intention of remaining there. Sherry became irritated and complained that Natalie should not try to stay with her husband without permission. She even revealed that she had already reserved a graveyard plot and a tombstone so that she could share them with Takasi. Upon hearing that, Takasi immediately told her not to waste money and called her an idiot. Takasi opened the door and told Natalie and Sherry that they could simply meet Portman and ask him directly. The three of them walked to the end of the building, where Portman, Hiryu, and the Carson sisters were already waiting. As they approached, Takasi greeted them. It had been several months since they had last seen each other, and he asked how everyone had been. The Carson sisters immediately ran toward Takasi, and Rio wrapped her arms around him, complaining that she had not been doing well at all. Takasi became puzzled by the way she ended her sentences, since neither she nor Emily had spoken like that when they communicated in English. Rio explained that she had consulted Emily because she wanted to show more individuality and wondered how it sounded. Emily happily explained that Japanese was enjoyable because it allowed them to use all kinds of expressions. In response, Takasi told them that both Rio and Emily were already unique enough without having to talk like that. From the back, Hiryu called out to Takasi and greeted him, commenting on how sharp his school uniform looked. All three of them now appeared to be ordinary students. Out of habit, Takasi ordered Hiryu to state his model and name. However, Hiryu simply laughed and pointed out that even Takasi could no longer tell what was inside him, adding that the tech team would surely be delighted. Sherry quickly realized that the person in front of them was Hiryu, but Takasi refused to believe it and thought they were joking. Hiryu then explained that after everything that had happened, only his brain remained. Since he had the opportunity, he had requested a more popular body. As a result, he had become an extremely cute boy and had even been pampered by a voluptuous woman at the airport. Takasi immediately called him a dirty old man and wondered why he was speaking in the Kansai dialect. Hiryu casually explained that he had learned Japanese through comedy programs and asked if there was anything wrong with that. Natalie then stepped forward and questioned why Hiryu and the Carson sisters had come all the way to Japan in the first place. She wondered if they had come for sightseeing. Sherry also commented that it was a rather strange group for a sightseeing trip. At that point, Portman finally spoke. He revealed that they had not come to Japan for tourism. They had come for an entirely different purpose, which was precisely why that particular group had gathered together. Takasi immediately asked what he meant by a different purpose. With an unusually cold tone, Portman revealed that they had come to bring Natalie and Sherry back to the military. Neither of the girls moved. Takasi immediately questioned why. Portman apologized and admitted that he could not explain the details. However, he insisted that something terrible would happen if they failed to bring the two of them back. Natalie became angry and firmly declared that no matter what the circumstances were, she had no intention of returning to the military. Takasi then asked why Portman could not explain the situation, because without a proper explanation he could not imagine Natalie and Sherry ever agreeing to such a request. Portman admitted that he felt sorry about the situation as well, but he insisted that he simply could not reveal the reason at that moment. He promised that he would explain everything once they returned to the military and asked them to quietly follow him for now. Sherry immediately became furious and snapped back, telling him to save such words for his dreams when he actually slept. Takasi then asked how long Natalie and Sherry would have to return to the military. Portman calmly answered that the duration would be for the rest of their lives. The atmosphere instantly turned cold. Even Takasi could not believe what he had heard and asked Portman if he had lost his mind, because such a thing was obviously impossible no matter how anyone looked at it. Takasi then declared that they were leaving and heading home. However, the Carson sisters immediately drew their weapons and pointed them at the three of them, declaring that they would not be allowed to go home. They warned them not to move, but Natalie simply laughed at the threat. She found it unbelievable that they intended to threaten them and even admired their courage. Takasi quickly tried to calm her down, but Natalie was already furious. In her eyes, they had pointed weapons at them, and she had no intention of letting it go. Takasi could only wonder how things had turned out this way. All he had wanted was to live normally and enjoy an ordinary life. He had only wanted to spend peaceful days one after another. Ever since coming to Japan, Natalie and Sherry had been laughing far more than before. Looking back at their time in the military, the two of them had become unbelievably gentle compared to those days. All Takasi, Natalie, and Sherry wanted now was to treasure their everyday lives. At the same time, Takasi understood that Portman and the others probably had circumstances of their own. He knew they were not the type of people who would do something like this on a whim or for no reason. Takasi began speaking honestly about how much they all meant to him. He confessed that the only reason he had managed to maintain his sanity during those 3 years was because of them. As he shared his feelings, Natalie and Sherry quietly listened. Looking back, their daily lives back then had been terrible, but they had still created precious memories together. They had once told Takasi that he was precious to them and that they wished for his happiness more than anything. Remembering those words had given him incredible strength. Because of that, Takasi asked them if those words had all been lies. The Carson sisters immediately denied it. Tears began flowing from their eyes. Emily confessed that she cared deeply about him and that the reason she was still alive was because of him. Rio also tearfully admitted that she loved Takasi and that the reason her heart had not broken was because of him. Hearing that, Takasi pleaded with them to tell him the reason behind everything if they truly felt that way. Hiryu then explained that Portman and the Carson sisters had circumstances of their own as well and asked Takasi to try to understand them a little. Takasi immediately replied that if they had circumstances, then they should explain them. At that moment, Hiryu suddenly burst out. He shouted that there were circumstances they simply could not talk about. He confessed that he did not want things to be this way either, but they had no choice. Desperately, he begged Takasi to understand. After hearing that, Takasi quietly asked whether all of this was an order from the military. Takasi asked them whether someone in the military was threatening them. The group fell silent for a moment, and Portman eventually asked if they admitted that they were being threatened. Would Takasi and the others follow his instructions? However, Takasi immediately rejected the idea. In his mind, there was no reason to obey anyone. If someone was threatening them, they could simply crush the person responsible. To him, that was a much easier solution. Hiryu then seriously explained that the situation they were facing was truly severe. If things could be solved that easily, they would never have come all the way to Japan. Even he had things he absolutely could not lose, and he was prepared to do anything necessary to protect what was important to him. Hearing that, Takasi became serious. He decided to keep things simple. The loser would obey the winner, and that would be the quickest way to settle everything. He declared that if they managed to defeat him, he would return to the military as well. Immediately afterward, Takasi, Natalie, and Sherry transformed. Their bodies dissolved into something resembling smoke. Sherry announced her type and transformed into the 11-type mixed-type special biological soldier, Seal Iceland, declaring that her preparations were complete. Natalie followed, revealing herself as the 6-type regressive Super 8-type special biological soldier, Natalie Tophyte Binkster. She also declared that her combat preparations were complete. Finally, Takasi completed his own transformation as the all-type mixed extinct-type special biological soldier, Shibusaki Takasi. His preparations for battle were complete as well. The Carson sisters instantly took to the air and opened fire on the three of them. They used Alias Sonic, a high-speed movement technique that utilized anti-unique gravity. Takasi immediately instructed Natalie and Sherry that he would personally deal with the Carson sisters. He ordered the two girls to handle Portman and Hiryu. Without hesitation, Natalie and Sherry rushed toward them. In an instant, both Portman and Hiryu were easily knocked down. Sherry mockingly remarked that they were far too weak and could hardly believe they had acted so confidently with such a level of strength. Natalie also expressed her disappointment, admitting that after they had started such a big fight, she had expected them to put up more resistance. Portman was unable to say anything, while Hiryu could only comment that they had been defeated in mere seconds. Sherry proudly declared that they were too weak to even deserve being called a challenge. Natalie then approached them once more and forcefully stomped on Portman. She warned him that if he did not regenerate with everything he had, he would actually die. Meanwhile, Portman desperately begged her to stop. At the same time, Sherry was tormenting Hiryu as well. She tightly gripped his head with tremendous force and cheerfully wondered whether it was time to crush his brain. Hiryu immediately protested, insisting that it was no joke. Listening to the miserable cries of Hiryu and Portman, Takasi could not help but think that Natalie and Sherry were getting overly excited. It had been a long time since they had fought seriously, and the two of them were acting almost like psychopaths. Takasi turned his attention toward the Carson sisters. Compared to Portman and Hiryu, who specialized in close to mid-range combat, the Carson sisters were a much greater threat. Their specialty was firing positron cannons from extreme long range, making them far more dangerous. Hiryu protested and questioned whether Natalie and Sherry really had the luxury of playing around while the Carson sisters were still active. He reminded them that everyone present knew just how destructive their positron cannons were. Portman agreed and warned the girls that no matter how powerful Takashi might be, defeating those two would be impossible. Bringing down the Carson sisters, who were positioned all the way up near the stratosphere, simply could not be done. Sherry casually replied that Takashi would be perfectly fine and told Hiryu that trying to stall for time was pointless. Natalie guessed that they simply did not understand Takashi's characteristics. According to her, only she, Sherry, and the Inspector General truly knew all of Takashi's abilities. Sherry wondered whether Takashi had not used his powers during the war. Natalie explained that observing him from the sidelines was not enough to understand the nature of his abilities. She pointed out that his use of Luca and the reactions of others were perfect examples of that. Sherry agreed, while Portman could only stare in disbelief. He found it hard to understand and wondered whether they were claiming that even the level of combat ability Takashi had displayed so far was merely a fraction of his true power. Sherry confirmed that it was, and Natalie explained that this was precisely why Takashi was known as the arrival point. High above, the Carson sisters aimed their cannons directly at Takashi. They apologized, believing that this was the only way. However, before they could do anything, Takashi spoke directly into their minds. He asked whether they could hear him and informed them that Portman and Hiryu had already been defeated. He tried to persuade them to surrender and come down. The Carson sisters were shocked and immediately became irritated. Rio could not believe that Portman and Hiryu had lost so easily. Emily bluntly dismissed them as completely useless and nothing more than dead weight. Rio then gave a signal, informing Emily that the positron cannon would finish charging in 2 minutes. Emily confidently declared that Takashi could never defeat them before then. However, Takashi merely smiled. With 2 minutes remaining, he wondered whether they truly believed he would quietly wait for them. At that moment, Takashi activated his ability and sent out a signal that caused the Carson sisters to freeze. Rio panicked as she realized that her body was moving on its own and told Emily that they needed to leave immediately. Emily responded that she understood. Then, a gigantic figure with pointed nail-like hands suddenly appeared and grabbed the cannons they were carrying. The sight left the Carson sisters stunned. Rio panicked and realized that the barrel of her cannon would not move at all. Emily discovered that the same thing had happened to hers. Takashi happily informed them that it was all because of him. He explained that he was holding on to their cannons, making escape impossible. Once again, he spoke directly into their minds and asked how they felt and whether they were surprised. The Carson sisters were left astonished by Takashi's power. It was a characteristic of the Zero-type Odoheim. No matter how great the distance between them, he could still touch the bodies of his opponents. The barrels of the positron cannons suddenly began to crack, making the Carson sisters nervous. Takashi informed them that he was about to completely crush the barrels. Speaking directly into their minds again, he explained that without those cannons, they would no longer be able to do anything. The Carson sisters panicked and desperately pleaded with him to stop. However, Takashi applied his full strength and completely crushed the barrels. He told them that it was time to come down already. He even warned them that if they still intended to fight, he would personally knock them down with force. Immediately, the Carson sisters surrendered and announced that they were coming down. Soon afterward, the Carson sisters, Portman, and Hiryu were all kneeling on the ground. Natalie and Sherry looked at them while Takashi asked who exactly had been threatening them. He told them that if they simply revealed the culprit, he would defeat that person on behalf of all 4 of them. Hiryu then explained that they were not really being threatened by anyone. Instead, what they had been risking their lives to protect was Takashi's peaceful daily life. Portman added that the military itself had fallen into chaos. After Takashi returned to Japan, unrest had erupted inside the organization. Back in the military, countless people had gathered outside the Inspector General's office in protest. Everyone was searching for Takashi and demanded that he be brought back. Others questioned the Inspector General, asking whether it was true that Takashi had gone home because they could no longer endure their daily lives without him. The Inspector General tried to calm everyone down and explained that Takashi had only returned to Japan temporarily to confirm the safety of his family. He also mentioned that Sherry had purchased a house and intended to live there with Takashi. However, one of the soldiers angrily insisted that Takashi should return soon. Portman continued his explanation. At first, everyone had accepted the situation, but when Sherry herself went to Japan and the Inspector General bought the house, everyone realized that Takashi had no intention of returning. As a result, soldiers throughout the military had started packing their belongings and were making plans to flood into Japan. The truth finally dawned on Takashi. In shock, he realized that sending Natalie and Sherry back to the military had merely been a cover. It was intended to make everyone believe that he would eventually return someday. Everyone silently agreed. Hiryu then reminded Takashi of the words he had repeated countless times during the war. He had always spoken about wanting to live a normal life once the fighting was over. They believed that if they revealed the truth, Takashi would accept everyone without hesitation. In that case, he would be forced to abandon the peaceful daily life he had dreamed of. That was why, even at the cost of their own lives, they had wanted to protect that ordinary life for him. But now that they had lost, there was nothing they could do. Hiryu quietly told him that Natalie and Sherry could simply continue living in Japan. The atmosphere became heavy, and all of them lowered their heads sadly. Then Takashi called out to them and extended his hand. He told them that the normal high school life he wished for was not something that should be built upon the sacrifice of others. If everyone wanted to come, then they were free to come. He would protect everything all at once. That evening, Karen received a message from Takashi telling her to go ahead and eat dinner first. She wondered why Takashi and the others were taking so long. Suddenly, a breaking news report appeared on television. The announcer in the studio reported that the latest song from the international diva Olivia Stagia was receiving an overwhelming response around the world. Another reporter, standing outside Olivia's concert venue, informed viewers that enormous crowds were overflowing around the area. Then Olivia's message captured everyone's attention. She asked the world to listen to her feelings and proudly revealed that her newest song had been dedicated to Takashi. Without hesitation, Olivia openly declared her love for Takashi and boldly claimed that the two of them were only 5 seconds away from becoming intimate. After Olivia's concert, her name appeared everywhere across social media and even on the news. During an interview, she was asked about Takashi. Without hesitation, she proudly described Takashi as the superhero who had saved the world. She admitted that his appearance was not particularly impressive, but aside from that, she considered him incredibly cool. Watching the broadcast on television, Takashi insisted that his looks were cool too. Takashi could not understand what Olivia was trying to do. Even if she disliked him, he wondered why she would go this far. Karen then asked whether he was acquainted with Olivia Stagia. Takashi replied that acquainted was one way to put it, though they had actually argued before. Takashi explained that many things had happened during his time in the military. He recalled calling out to Natalie and Sherry and informing them that Olivia Stagia was holding a comfort show. He mentioned how amazing it was that a world-class diva would come to a place like their workplace and invited the two of them to listen to the performance. However, Natalie turned down the invitation. Takashi then told them that taking time to forget things was important and mentioned that Olivia's singing voice was said to make people's hearts feel lighter. At that moment, a helicopter suddenly appeared overhead. Olivia was among the passengers and was loudly asking about arrival point. The pilot informed her that the 4 people below were the reference point and pointed out that the man below was arrival point. The helicopter landed immediately, and Olivia stepped outside. Upon seeing Takashi, she recognized him as arrival point. Her expectations quickly faded, and she considered it a waste to have gotten her hopes up, viewing him as nothing more than a gloomy brat. Takashi was left completely confused. Olivia then handed him a document concerning auditory hallucinations, which only made him more uncertain. That led Olivia to reveal that she had expected him to be a more mature and handsome man, making her feel disappointed. She then made fun of him, claiming that he looked like the type who could not drink coffee without pouring in large amounts of sugar and milk, adding that his face looked childish. Takashi refused to let himself be looked down on and argued that he was already capable of drinking lightly sweetened coffee. He also fired back with an insult of his own, which immediately angered Olivia. That was how everything happened. Since that day, Olivia had started paying unusual attention to Takashi. Karen then brought up the part where Olivia had declared that she loved Takashi and that they were only 5 seconds away from sleeping together. Takashi described it as a new kind of harassment and admitted that he had no idea what her intentions were. Soon after, he received a call from Rinko. Seeing the caller, Takashi muttered nervously that she was calling. Natalie remarked that he was clearly loved, while Sherry commented that she only hoped he would not end up getting stabbed. From the other side of the line, Rinko raised her voice after hearing Olivia's new song and demanded to know what was happening. Takashi admitted that he did not really understand the situation either, though it seemed that getting an autograph for her would not be possible. Sherry remarked that Takashi had actually thought Rinko was calling because she wanted an autograph, while Natalie commented that Takashi was pretty stupid after all. Sherry then pointed out that Olivia was also clumsy, and Natalie found it amusing because, despite everything that had happened, Olivia clearly liked Takashi. After hearing that, Karen remarked that no matter how much Olivia wanted Takashi to notice her, doing things that way was simply wrong. She also concluded that Olivia was an idiot as well. Karen then raised her voice and pointed out that Takashi and Olivia were supposed to be on bad terms. She wondered if that really meant that the world's #1 diva had feelings for Takashi. Natalie then brought up the time Olivia had been abducted by aliens and mentioned that she had been acting like a stalker ever since Takashi had saved her. The following day, inside the classroom, the students were busy talking about Olivia Stagia's new song. One student remarked that it was an excellent psalm, while another mentioned that it felt like a straightforward expression of love. They even watched a video in which Olivia talked about Takashi's personal information. She revealed that he was 16 years old and mentioned that his family name meant cherry blossoms. She even went as far as saying that it was a name too beautiful for baby Takashi. Just as Takashi was about to enter the classroom, he overheard one of the students remarking that being loved by a world-class diva was incredible. Upon hearing that, Takashi found it hard to believe that Olivia had actually gone that far. In his mind, he imagined that the moment he entered the room, everyone would surround him with questions about where he had met Olivia and what exactly being a superhero meant. However, Takashi had no desire to explain any of it. Natalie asked why he did not simply reveal everything, but Takashi firmly refused the idea and was determined not to give up. Sherry remarked that he was far too stubborn. Although he did not want to lie, he knew he would somehow have to gloss over the matter. Yet when he finally entered the classroom, nobody paid any attention to him. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Sherry remarked that it was not something to sigh in relief about, while Natalie pointed out that this was not something he should be happy about either. Takashi noted that the fact that he was a former military member had not been exposed either, and he considered it fortunate that he did not have to resort to lying. Meanwhile, a group of boys started talking about Takashi. One of them commented that there was a world of difference between them. Another remarked that if Olivia had really fallen for Takashi, then he must surely be a handsome guy. One boy pointed out that Takashi the superhero and the gloomy background student in their class were completely different people. At this point, having the same name felt like nothing more than a coincidence. The group then wondered what kind of person the real Takashi actually was. Sherry noticed the group of boys and remarked that they seemed to believe they were talking about a different person, while Natalie pointed out that most people would never imagine that the two were acquainted in the first place. In a way, this was Takashi's normal life, and because of that he felt relieved. He was grateful to the hub for allowing him to avoid Olivia's trap, but at the same time he could not help wondering why everyone avoided him so much. He even began to question whether he had done something that made people hate him that much. Nearby, Amano was becoming increasingly nervous as he thought that the situation was bad. Quietly, he followed Takashi, Natalie, and Sherry as they stepped outside the classroom. He believed that he had to do something about the situation. Even though he had been the one who started the fire, he felt that it had spread too far. In his mind, Natalie's cold attitude could only be because of her hatred toward Takashi. He thought that if he failed to put out the flames now, everything would truly be over. However, he had no idea what he was supposed to do. Then a familiar voice called out to Takashi. It was Tomo, informing him that there had been a report from Nirvana's judgment. She also pointed out that they had something known as a model type. Takashi immediately told her not to discuss such things at school. Watching from a distance, Amano was shocked to see Tomo talking to Takashi. Tomo's appeal came from her cold and mysterious atmosphere, and seeing her show such a girlish smile left him stunned. Natalie then assured Takashi that talking about model types was fine and that if military personnel showed up, they simply had to crush them and leave everything to her. As Amano observed the scene, jealousy started to build within him as he noticed Natalie pressing her chest and thighs against Takashi. Takashi lightly tapped her on the head and pointed out that she kept saying things that would only create trouble. While continuing to watch, Amano felt irritated and found the situation strange. He even thought that Takashi's sex drive had somehow dried up. Sherry then asked Tomo about Nirvana's judgment. At that moment, Amano's attention shifted toward Sherry. He could not help but think that she was cute. Seal Iceland, with her silver hair, mysterious appearance, and remarkably slender figure, had attracted the attention of the entire grade. She had gained enthusiastic admirers regardless of gender. Despite that, she had never spoken to anyone since transferring into the school. She kept everyone at a distance as though she viewed them as enemies. However, there was one exception to that rule, and that person was Takashi. Meanwhile, the group of boys recognized Takashi as the rumored Shibasaki. One of them admitted feeling jealous and could not understand how Takashi had managed to win the hearts of such beautiful girls. Another boy mentioned that he had once approached Takashi out of curiosity. He recalled asking Takashi about his relationship with Natalie and where he had met her. Takashi had hesitated for a moment before explaining that they had gotten along while studying abroad. The boy had then asked about Sherry, and Takashi had given the same answer, saying that they had hit it off in a similar way. Another student questioned him about how he had become close to Tomo. Takashi had explained that they had gone flower picking together and had gotten along from there. That was how the conversation had gone. Another boy commented that the whole thing was unlikable. He remarked that Takashi was seriously a gloomy person and impossible to talk to. He even suggested that the rumors about Takashi having leverage over the girls might actually be true, perhaps even something as extreme as holding their families hostage. Hearing all of this, Amano realized how bad the situation had become. The mystery behind how the gloomy background character, Shibasaki, had monopolized the attention of beautiful girls only made things worse. Hatred toward Takashi was gradually spreading throughout the entire grade. Amano became anxious at the thought that everything had started because of a lie he had casually made up. He thought that if Takashi had never transferred to the school, none of this would have happened. As he agonized over the situation, two girls noticed him. Later, on the rooftop, Takashi arrived and found Rinji already there, inviting everyone to eat together. Takashi and Natalie acknowledged his presence. Natalie complained that Rinji kept coming over every lunch break, while Sherry added that she had already heard enough baseball talk. Rinji simply felt that it was unfair that they were allowed to spend all their time with Takashi. As everyone sat down to eat, Takashi asked Rinji whether it was really okay for him to keep hanging around with him. Rinji wondered what he meant, and Takashi explained that Rinji seemed to have many friends. Because of that, Takashi wondered whether Rinji would not get scolded if he failed to spend time with the boys in his class every now and then. Takashi pointed out that Rinji had his own social life, while he himself was a loner without any friends in his class. However, Rinji insisted that he did not have friends either. He explained that he was in a different class from Rinko and Fumika, making him a loner as well. Because of that, he simply wanted to continue coming over to spend time with them. Takashi replied that there was no way someone with his own fan club could possibly be considered a loner. Rinji only reacted to the remark. Rinji then turned his attention to Tomo, insisting that there was no way the young lady of the Hibari family could be a loner either. Tomo, however, considered herself a loner because she viewed herself as a gloomy person and an extreme otaku. Meanwhile, Sherry remarked that everyone seemed eager to show off how gloomy they were. Back in elementary school, Takashi had been able to make friends simply by talking about baseball. However, after spending 3 years at war, everyone around him had likely gone through all kinds of experiences, to the point that even Fumika's mother had approached him about certain matters. Takashi had once been good at making friends. Even so, there was still no message from Fumika that day either. Normally, Fumika would have been the first person to call during times like this. Takashi had been with Fumika ever since they were born. They had always been together, to the point that they were born on the same day in the same hospital and had even slept in the same bed. They had grown up side by side like brother and sister. Takashi thought that perhaps it was finally time for Fumika to become independent from her brother. However, Natalie suddenly noticed someone approaching. It turned out to be Rinko, who came over and greeted the group. Rinji remarked that Rinko was a loner as well, despite being a charismatic model. Rinko confirmed it and wondered what was wrong with that. Rinko explained that because Fumika was absent, she had no one to talk to and asked Takashi to keep her company instead. Takashi was surprised to hear that Fumika had not come to school. He immediately wondered whether she had caught a cold or something similar. Rinko explained that she had tried contacting Fumika earlier, but it seemed that some kind of trouble had occurred. Takashi asked what kind of trouble it was, since Fumika had not told him much about anything. Takashi remembered that Fumika had looked perfectly fine when he had met her on the way home the previous day. He began wondering if something had happened after that. Hoping that she would respond properly, Takashi composed a message for Fumika, asking what was wrong and whether she wanted to talk about it. Rinko then asked Takashi if he remembered the promise they had made for the next day. Takashi confirmed that they were supposed to go shopping for swimsuits. Rinko reminded him that they would be meeting at 10 o'clock at the mall in the neighboring town and noted that it was quite far away, so he should not arrive late. Fumika had also been looking forward to the outing. It had been quite some time since everyone had gone out together with such a large group. Takashi planned to leave early, so he felt there would be no problem. In response, Rinko wondered just how much he was looking forward to the trip. Meanwhile, as Fumika read the message that Takashi had sent to her, tears flowed from her eyes. The reason for her distress was the provisional draft notice before her. She had been ordered to be deployed in just 2 days.